"I know you're after my money," he said. "I'm not the father of these twins." But 5 years later, the twins' faces told the truth. Spring arrived loud that year. Music drifted across the park in bright waves, mixing with laughter, the hum of conversations, and the soft rattle of game booths lining the walkway. Children ran past with painted faces, couples lingered near food stalls, and banners swayed gently above the crowd. The town's festival always felt alive, but today the energy carried something heavier, the kind of feeling that makes a person slow down without knowing why. Eric Spencer walked through the crowd with steady steps, hands tucked into his coat pockets. People greeted him politely as he passed, some with curiosity, others with quiet admiration. He nodded when necessary, offering small smiles that never quite reached his eyes. Festivals used to feel like obligations, appearances to maintain, conversations to survive. But today he wasn't paying much attention to anyone. Not until he saw her. Camila stood near a craft booth, sunlight catching the loose strands of her hair as she laughed softly at something a vendor said. The sound reached him even through the noise, familiar enough to make him pause mid-step. For a moment he thought he was imagining it, memory playing tricks on him, but she turned slightly, and there was no doubt. His chest tightened. 5 years had passed, yet she looked almost the same, maybe a little calmer, a little stronger. There was a warmth around her that hadn't been there before, like someone who had learned how to stand steady through storms. Eric started toward her, unsure of what he would say, unsure if she would even want to speak to him. The crowd shifted, and only then did he notice the two children holding her hands. They were laughing about something, a balloon shaped like a dragon, completely unaware of him, a girl with bright, observant eyes and a boy whose expression carried a quiet seriousness beyond his age. He slowed. Something about them tugged at him in a way he couldn't explain. The twins turned at the same time, as if drawn by an invisible thread. Their gazes met his, and the world around him faded into a blur of color and sound. Same eyes, same stillness, same way of studying the world before speaking. The boy tilted his head slightly, studying Eric with curiosity rather than fear. He whispered something to his sister, and then, clear enough for Eric to hear, he said, "Mom, that man looks like me." The words landed like a sudden silence in the middle of music. Eric stopped walking. His breath caught, and for a second he couldn't move. The laughter around him faded into the background, replaced by the pounding of his own heartbeat. Camila turned slowly, following the direction of her children's gaze. Their eyes met. "Hi, Eric," she said gently. No anger, no bitterness, just calm recognition. "Hi." His voice felt unfamiliar, thinner than he expected. "I didn't know you were—" He stopped himself. The question felt too small for the moment. The twins watched quietly, curiosity shining in their faces. Eric crouched slightly, trying to steady himself, but his thoughts tangled together. A memory flashed, rain against glass, the smell of coffee, a sentence he wished he could pull back into his mouth and erase. "I know you're after my money. I'm not the father." The echo of his own voice pressed against him, heavy and unkind. For years he had told himself that leaving was the smart choice. That distance protected him. That doubt was safer than vulnerability. Yet standing here now, with two small faces reflecting pieces of himself back at him, those justifications felt hollow. Camila studied him for a moment before speaking again. "It's been a long time." "Yes," he said quietly. "Too long." The girl stepped closer to her brother. "Mom, is he your friend?" Camila's gaze softened. "Someone I used to know." Eric swallowed, unsure whether that description hurt or relieved him. "Before the story moves forward, let me ask you something. Have you ever walked away from someone because fear spoke louder than trust? Maybe you convinced yourself it was the right decision, only to wonder years later if you misunderstood everything. Life has a way of bringing people back to moments they thought were finished, not to punish them, but to show them what they refused to see before. Eric had spent years believing he was protecting himself. He knew what betrayal looked like. He had lived through it once and promised never to repeat that pain. But fear has a strange way of disguising itself as wisdom. It whispers that distance equals safety, that doubt equals strength. Standing in front of Camila and the twins, he realized that fear can also close doors that were never meant to be shut. The boy, Riley, though Eric didn't know his name yet, watched him closely. "Do you know us?" he asked. Eric hesitated. I'm not sure yet." Camila's expression didn't change, but her eyes held a quiet depth, like she understood every thought racing through his mind. "This story isn't about perfect people. It's about choices, the ones we make when we're afraid, and the ones we make when we finally decide to listen instead of run. Because sometimes the hardest truth isn't discovering who hurt us. It's realizing we may have hurt someone who never meant us harm. If you've ever faced a moment where trusting someone felt like stepping into the unknown, you already understand the tension Eric feels right now. Trust asks for courage, but doubt feels safer, until it isn't. And here's the part that changes everything. 5 years ago, one sentence pushed these two lives in completely different directions. 5 years later, the truth is standing in front of him, waiting to be acknowledged. But truth doesn't shout. It waits quietly, patient enough to be noticed when a person is finally ready. The festival music grew louder again, breaking the stillness between them. Riley tugged lightly on Camila's hand. "Mom, can we get ice cream?" She nodded. "In a minute." Eric stood slowly, unsure whether to stay or step back. "I didn't expect to see you here. This town isn't that big," she replied, her voice calm but thoughtful. "Eventually paths cross again." He nodded, unable to argue with that. "And if you're here for stories about second chances, about people learning the hard way that running away never solves what the heart keeps holding on to, you're in the right place. Go ahead and tap like and subscribe, not because someone asked you to, but because you want to stay for the rest of this journey. Because this moment, the one where a man realizes the past isn't finished with him, is only the beginning." 5 years ago, Eric Spencer walked away from a quiet cafe believing he had protected himself from a lie. Today, standing in the middle of a crowded festival, he's about to learn that the truth has been waiting patiently all along. The music faded behind Eric as he stepped away from the festival crowd, but the image of those two faces stayed with him long after the noise disappeared. 5 years earlier, life had looked very different. Back then, Maple Avenue carried the quiet rhythm of early mornings and slow afternoons. The cafe on the corner had become Eric's unofficial office, a place where he could sit without the heavy expectations that followed him into every boardroom. His laptop usually stayed open, untouched coffee beside it, while he watched people come and go. People watched him too. The Spencer name had weight in that town. Some greeted him warmly, others carefully, as if every word might matter more than it should. Eric had learned to read intentions quickly, the way someone's smile lingered too long, the way conversations drifted toward business or opportunity. Years of disappointment had trained him to stay guarded. He preferred silence. On most days, he chose the same corner seat by the window. From there, he could see everything without being pulled into anything. Rain slid down the glass in thin lines that afternoon, turning the street outside into shifting reflections. He barely noticed when the cafe door opened. A woman stepped in carrying grocery bags, her sleeves damp from the rain. She paused near the entrance, scanning the room with tired but kind eyes. Most tables were full. The only empty chair sat across from him. She approached carefully. "Is this seat taken?" Eric looked up surprised by the simplicity of the question. No hesitation. No nervous smile meant to impress him. "No," he said, gesturing toward it. "Go ahead." She settled into the chair with a quiet sigh, brushing rain from her sleeve. For a moment they sat in comfortable silence, strangers sharing space because of the weather. Then she laughed softly to herself. "I think the sky has a personal problem with me today." Eric glanced outside. "It's been following me around too." That was all it took to begin something neither of them expected. Over the next few days, he noticed her again, sometimes reading, sometimes writing small notes in a worn notebook. She greeted the staff by name, thanked them without rushing, and never once looked at him like he was someone special. That alone caught his attention. Most people either avoided him or leaned too close, trying to impress him. She did neither. One evening, as the rain finally stopped, she gathered her things and stood. "See you around," she said casually, as if they had known each other longer than a few shared afternoons. He nodded. "I'm usually here." She smiled. "I figured." Weeks passed. Their conversations grew slowly, never forced. She told him stories about the bookstore where she worked, a little girl who insisted on reading fairy tales backward, an elderly man who returned every week to reread the same chapter of a novel he loved. "What about you?" she asked once, resting her chin on her hand. "What about me? You listen like you're solving a puzzle." Eric smirked faintly. "Maybe I am. And what's the puzzle?" He hesitated, choosing his words carefully, trying to figure out who's real. She didn't laugh at him. She didn't argue either. She just nodded slightly. "Maybe real people don't need to prove anything. Maybe they just show up." The simplicity of her answer unsettled him. He had spent years believing that trust had to be earned through proof, through time, through careful observation. Yet she spoke as if honesty were something quiet and obvious. Camila never asked about his business, never hinted at needing help, never treated him differently after learning his last name. That absence of expectation slowly lowered his guard, though he would never admit it aloud. One night as the cafe prepared to close, they stepped outside together. The air smelled like fresh rain and distant street food from the night market down the block. "You always watch people," she said. nudging him lightly with her shoulder. Do you ever let anyone watch you back? He gave a small shrug. Depends on the person. And which category am I in? He looked at her, studying her expression. There was no pressure behind the question, just curiosity. I'm still deciding, he said honestly. She laughed softly. Fair enough. They began walking in the same direction without planning it. The conversation shifted from small jokes to quieter topics. Childhood memories, favorite books, the way certain places hold meaning long after people leave them. Eric found himself speaking more than usual, revealing pieces of himself without realizing it. Not everything, never everything, but enough to feel different. At the park, they paused near the swings where children's laughter echoed through the evening air. Camila watched them with a thoughtful smile. I like moments like this, she said. People forget to pretend. And what do I look like when I'm not pretending? He asked. She tilted her head, studying him gently. Like someone who forgot how easy kindness used to be. The words didn't feel like criticism. They felt like a quiet observation he couldn't ignore. For a while, Eric believed he had finally found a connection that didn't come with expectations or hidden motives. Coffee turned into walks, walks turned into comfortable silence, and silence turned into something softer than he had allowed himself in years. Yet beneath that warmth lived a quiet fear. Every laugh reminded him of the last time he trusted someone too easily, a relationship that ended publicly and painfully, leaving him determined never to look foolish again. Even when Camila's honesty felt real, a part of him waited for the moment when everything would change. One evening she glanced at him thoughtfully. You don't have to carry every old mistake into new conversations. Experience teaches you to be careful, he replied. She nodded. Careful is good. Closed off isn't. He didn't answer, because somewhere deep down he wasn't sure he knew the difference anymore. And that was the man Eric Spencer had become before everything fell apart. Someone who wanted connection but didn't fully trust it. Someone who listened closely yet kept one foot ready to step back at the first sign of danger. He didn't realize then that fear would soon speak louder than the quiet certainty growing between them. And when that moment arrived, it would change both of their lives for the next 5 years. Autumn arrived quietly that year, slipping into the town without warning. The cafe windows filled with warm light earlier each evening, and the air carried the crisp smell of fallen leaves. Eric noticed a change in Camila before he noticed the season itself. She laughed a little less, paused more often between sentences, and sometimes held her cup with both hands as if gathering courage. One morning she sent him a simple message. Can we meet early today? Same place. He arrived before sunrise, the cafe nearly empty except for the soft clatter of dishes behind the counter. Camila sat at their usual table, her back straight, eyes calm but distant. When he approached, she offered a small smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Hey, he said, sliding into the chair. Hi. For a moment neither spoke. Outside, the streetlights flickered off one by one as morning crept in. Eric felt an unfamiliar tension pressing against his chest. You sounded serious, he said finally. She nodded slowly. Her fingers traced the rim of her cup. I didn't know how else to say this, so I'm just going to say it. He waited. I'm pregnant, she said softly. With twins. The words settled between them like a sudden silence. Eric stared at her, searching her face for hesitation, for uncertainty, anything that might explain the rush of fear rising inside him. Instead, he found calm honesty, steady and unwavering. And you think they're mine? He asked, his voice sharper than he intended. I know they are, she replied gently. His mind filled with old memories he had tried to bury, betrayal dressed as affection, promises that turned into headlines and whispered jokes behind his back. The warmth he had felt with Camila began to twist into doubt. You don't even seem surprised, he said quietly. I've had time to process it, she answered. I wanted to tell you when I was sure. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. Funny how timing works. Her brow furrowed slightly. What does that mean? It means people know who I am, he said. They know what my last name comes with. The shift in his tone changed the air around them. Camila's shoulders stiffened, though she kept her voice calm. Eric, I'm telling you this because it's the truth, not because I want anything from you. But fear had already taken hold. I know how this looks, he said, standing abruptly. I know you're after my money. I'm not the father of these twins. The words sounded harsher out loud than they had in his head, yet once spoken they refused to soften. Camila blinked slowly, hurt flashing across her face before she hid it behind quiet composure. You don't believe me at all? I believe what experience has taught me, he replied, though the certainty in his voice felt thinner with every second. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself. I would never lie to you. But he was already stepping away from the table, grabbing his coat as if the room itself had become too small. Take care of yourself, he said, avoiding her eyes. The door closed behind him with a dull chime. Camila remained seated, staring at the untouched coffee between her hands. Outside, the first drops of rain began to fall again, tapping lightly against the glass. She whispered to herself, barely audible, "You don't know me at all." And just like that, a connection built slowly over months collapsed in a single morning. Years passed after that day. Camila learned how to carry life forward one small step at a time. The twins, Brielle and Riley, filled her apartment with laughter and questions that never seemed to end. Bedtime stories became her quiet escape after long shifts at the bookstore. Some nights she fell asleep sitting upright beside their beds, too tired to move but too content to complain. She never spoke badly about Eric. When the twins asked about their father, she simply said, "Sometimes adults make mistakes when they're afraid. What matters is who they choose to become later." Across town, Eric's life moved quickly. Business deals, polished events, conversations that sounded impressive but felt hollow. He dated occasionally, but nothing lasted long enough to matter. Late at night, when the city finally quieted, he found himself replaying that morning in the cafe, the look in Camila's eyes, the calm certainty in her voice. He told himself he had made the smart decision, yet the thought never settled completely. And now, standing at the festival 5 years later, those memories returned with a force he could no longer ignore. Camila shifted the strap of her bag higher on her shoulder as the twins tugged her toward the ice cream stand. The festival lights reflected softly in their eyes, and for a moment she almost forgot Eric was still standing a few steps behind them, watching like someone trying to decide whether to stay or leave. Riley glanced back first. "Are you coming?" he asked Eric, as if the question were simple. Eric hesitated. 5 years ago he would have walked away without thinking twice. Today his feet stayed where they were. "If your mom says it's okay," he answered carefully. Camila studied him for a second, then gave a small nod. "We're just getting ice cream." They walked together through the crowd, not close enough to look like a family, but not distant enough to feel like strangers either. Brielle skipped ahead, pointing at colorful flavors while Riley stayed near Eric, occasionally sneaking curious glances at him. "You look nervous," Riley said matter-of-factly. Eric let out a soft breath. "Maybe I am. Why?" "Because sometimes people get a second chance and don't know what to do with it." Riley considered that answer seriously, as if weighing whether it made sense. "Mom says second chances are for people who learn." Camila heard the comment and smiled faintly without turning around. They reached the stand, and while the twins debated flavors, Eric found himself standing beside Camila in a quiet pocket of space. "I didn't expect to see you today," he said softly. She nodded. "The kids love this festival. We come every year." "We," he repeated before thinking. She met his eyes gently. "Yes. We." There was no accusation in her voice, just a quiet statement of reality. "I've thought about that day a lot," he admitted. "More than I should probably admit." "I figured you might," she replied. "People don't forget moments that change everything." He swallowed, unsure how to move forward without reopening old wounds. "They look happy." "They are," she said simply. "Life wasn't easy at first, but it's been good." Brielle ran back holding 2 cones. "Mom, they have strawberry and chocolate swirl." Riley handed one carefully to Eric. "This one's extra big. I told them you might want it." Eric blinked, surprised. "You didn't have to do that." Riley shrugged. "You look like someone who needs ice cream." Camila laughed quietly, the sound lighter than before. Eric realized he hadn't heard that laugh in years, not directed at him at least, and the absence suddenly felt heavy. They sat on a nearby bench while the twins talked about school, races, and a kite they wanted to build someday. Eric listened more than he spoke, noticing little things that felt strangely familiar. The way Riley paused before answering, the way Brielle tilted her head when curious. Each detail chipped away at the wall he had built around himself. At one point, Brielle leaned closer to Camila and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "He smiles like you and you're happy." Camila's eyes softened, but she didn't comment. Eric felt his chest tighten again, not with fear this time, but with the weight of possibility. "Can I ask something?" he said quietly. Camila nodded. "Why didn't you reach out after that day?" She thought for a moment before answering. "Because I believed people should choose to come back on their own. I didn't want you to feel forced." The honesty in her words left him silent. Riley finished his ice cream and wiped his hands carefully. "Are you going to come again tomorrow?" Eric hesitated, looking at Camila for guidance. She didn't rescue him with an answer. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'd like to see you both again if that's okay." Brielle grinned. "Then you should. We like new friends. Camilla stood, brushing grass from her dress. We should head home. It's getting late. The twins ran ahead toward the exit, leaving Eric and Camilla walking side by side for the first time in years. The music softened behind them, replaced by quieter evening sounds. I'm sorry, he said suddenly. She didn't stop walking, but her expression changed slightly. For what part? For not listening. For assuming the worst. She let out a slow breath. Apologies matter, Eric, but what matters more is what people do after them. He nodded, understanding that words alone wouldn't fix the past. At the gate, the twins waved enthusiastically. Bye, Brielle called. Don't forget, Riley wants help building a kite. Riley added, and I have a race on Friday. Eric smiled, a genuine one this time. I'll remember. Camilla paused before leaving. If you're serious about being around, start small. They don't need promises, they need consistency. I can do that, he said quietly. She studied him for a moment, as if measuring whether he truly meant it. Then she gave a small, hopeful nod and turned toward the path home. Eric stayed at the entrance long after they disappeared into the evening crowd. The festival lights blurred slightly as he exhaled, realizing something had shifted inside him. 5 years ago, he walked away believing distance would protect him. Tonight, for the first time, he felt the pull to walk towards something instead. The next afternoon, Eric found himself standing outside a small hardware store with a bundle of thin wooden sticks tucked under one arm. He stared at the colorful paper rolls displayed in the window, feeling oddly unsure of himself. He hadn't built a kite since he was a child. Inside, he picked simple colors, blue and silver, hoping they would be enough. The cashier smiled politely, unaware that this small purchase felt heavier than any business deal he had signed that week. When he reached the park, Riley and Brielle were already waiting near the benches, their excitement impossible to hide. Camilla stood a few steps behind them, arms folded loosely, watching without interfering. You came, Riley said, trying to sound calm even though his eyes lit up. I said I would, Eric replied, handing him the bundle. Lead the way. They spread the materials across the grass. Brielle held the tape while Riley concentrated on tying knots, his tongue peeking out slightly in focus. Eric followed their rhythm, offering help only when asked. The simplicity of the moment felt new to him. No expectations, no pressure, just quiet cooperation. Camilla sat nearby with a book she barely read, her attention drifting toward them every few seconds. Is it supposed to lean like that? Brielle asked. Maybe a little, Eric said. Sometimes things don't have to be perfect to fly. Riley nodded seriously, adjusting the frame. Mom says that too. Camilla glanced up with a small smile but said nothing. When the kite finally lifted into the air, the twins cheered, running across the grass while Eric held the string steady. The wind pulled gently, and for the first time in a long while he felt present, not thinking about past mistakes or future expectations. Just now. Brielle ran back toward him, cheeks flushed. You should come for dinner, she said suddenly. She hesitated for a moment before nodding. If you're free. I am, he said, more quickly than he expected. Their apartment was small but warm, filled with drawings taped to the walls and books stacked in uneven piles. The scent of tomato soup filled the air as Camilla moved quietly around the kitchen. Eric sat at the table with the twins, helping with homework that involved more colored pencils than logic. You read stories? Brielle asked. Sometimes, he replied. Mom reads different voices for every character, she said proudly. Riley added, but you should try tonight. Eric chuckled softly. That sounds like a challenge. During dinner, conversation flowed easily. The twins spoke about school projects, a class pet turtle, and an upcoming race Riley refused to admit he was nervous about. Eric listened closely, offering encouragement without taking over the conversation. Camilla watched him carefully, measuring each action. She noticed he didn't try to impress the children with grand gestures. He asked questions, laughed when appropriate, and admitted when he didn't understand something. After dishes were cleared, Brielle handed him a worn storybook. Your turn. He opened it slowly, glancing at Camilla for reassurance. She leaned against the doorway, arms crossed, a quiet expression on her face that mixed caution with something softer. Eric began reading, his voice hesitant at first, then growing more animated as the twins giggled at his exaggerated accents. Riley leaned closer, listening intently, while Brielle clapped whenever he changed his tone. When the story ended, the twins hugged him without hesitation, a gesture so natural it caught him off guard. See you tomorrow? Riley asked. I'll try, Eric said gently, but I will definitely see you Friday for your race. Camilla walked him to the door. For a moment they stood in silence, the hum of the apartment settling around them. You didn't have to come today, she said. I wanted to, he replied. I know I can't fix everything overnight, but I can show up. Her gaze softened slightly. Consistency matters more than big promises. I'm learning that, he said quietly, She studied him, searching for the guarded man she used to know. He looked different now, not because he was trying to change, but because he had stopped hiding behind distance. "Thank you," she said finally. "For what? For starting small?" He nodded, understanding that this was only the beginning. As he walked down the hallway, he felt the weight of the past still lingering, but it no longer felt like a wall blocking his path. It felt like something he could finally walk through, one quiet moment at a time. Friday arrived with clear skies and the restless energy that comes before an important moment. Eric reached the school track earlier than he needed to. Parents gathered along the fence, some holding cameras, others cheering loudly even before the races began. The smell of fresh grass mixed with the sharp sound of whistles echoing across the field. He scanned the crowd until he spotted Camila sitting on the bleachers, Brielle beside her swinging her legs. Riley stood with the other kids near the starting line, trying to look calm even though his shoulders were tight with nerves. When Riley noticed Eric approaching, his face brightened despite his attempt to stay serious. "You came," he said, a little breathless. "I said I would," Eric replied, crouching slightly to meet his eyes. "You ready?" Riley shrugged. "Maybe." Camila smiled softly from the bleachers. "He's been practicing all week." The whistle blew, calling the children to their lanes. Eric stood beside Camila, unsure whether to speak or simply watch. For a few seconds they stayed quiet, sharing the same view of Riley adjusting his sneakers at the line. "You didn't have to make this a priority," she said gently. "It already was," he answered. The race began in a burst of movement. Riley ran hard, arms pumping, determination written across his face. He didn't win, but he didn't slow down either. When he crossed the finish line, he looked immediately toward the stands. Eric clapped first. Riley jogged over, breathing fast but smiling. "I didn't come first." "You finished strong," Eric said. "That matters." Brielle wrapped her brother in a quick hug. "Next time you'll beat everyone." Camila handed Riley a bottle of water. Her eyes flickered toward Eric, a silent acknowledgement that he had kept his word. Later, as the crowd thinned, Eric walked beside her along the edge of the track. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about what you said, facing the truth together." She nodded slowly. "It's not something I ever wanted to force, but the kids deserve clarity." He exhaled, steadying himself. "Then let's do the test." The words hung between them, heavy but necessary. Camila studied his face, searching for hesitation. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he replied. "Not because I doubt them, but because I don't want uncertainty hanging over their lives anymore." She gave a small nod. "Okay, we'll handle it together." The appointment itself was simple. Quiet paperwork, gentle reassurances from a nurse, and Riley asking far too many questions about how science worked. Eric answered what he could, laughing softly when Brielle insisted the machines looked like something from a movie. Afterward, they walked out into the sunlight without speaking much. The hardest part wasn't the test itself, it was the waiting. Days passed slowly. Eric found himself checking his phone more often than usual, replaying conversations in his head. He still came by the apartment, still helped with homework and stories, still built small routines that felt increasingly natural. The twins began treating him like someone who had always been around, asking him to taste test new recipes, to judge drawing contests, to listen when they were upset about school. One evening, while Brielle colored quietly at the table, Riley looked up from his book. "Are you nervous?" he asked Eric. "A little," Eric admitted. "Mom says being nervous means you care," Riley said thoughtfully. Camila glanced at Eric, her expression gentle. "He's right." The results arrived on a quiet afternoon. An envelope rested on the kitchen counter, simple and unassuming. Eric stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. His hands felt heavier than usual, as if the weight of 5 lost years sat inside that thin paper. "You don't have to open it alone," Camila said softly. "I don't want to," he replied. They sat at the table together while the twins played in the next room, unaware of how much this moment mattered. Eric slid a finger under the seal and unfolded the letter slowly. Positive. The word blurred for a second as he exhaled sharply. 5 years of doubt collapsed into a single truth. "I missed so much," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. Camila reached across the table, her voice calm. "Then don't miss what comes next." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. That evening, instead of long speeches or dramatic gestures, Eric sat on the living room floor with Brielle and Riley while they built another kite. The results rested quietly on the table behind him. Important, yes, but no longer the center of the moment. Riley looked up. "You're coming tomorrow too, right?" "Yes," Eric said without hesitation. Brielle smiled. "Good, because you still owe us 2 stories." Camila watched from the doorway, realizing that healing wasn't loud or sudden. It came through small promises kept again and again, through someone choosing to stay, even when the past whispered that leaving was easier. And this time, Eric didn't step back. He stayed exactly where he was, sitting on the floor, surrounded by laughter that felt more like home with every passing day. Time moved differently after that day. Not faster, not slower, just steadier. Eric stopped counting moments as chances to fix the past and started treating them as opportunities to be present. Saturday mornings became pancake experiments that usually ended in laughter. Evenings turned into quiet homework sessions where Brielle insisted on explaining math her own way while Riley carefully planned improvements for their next kite. Nothing about it felt forced. One afternoon, as golden light slipped through the apartment windows, Camila watched Eric help Riley adjust a small model plane. He listened closely, letting Riley lead, stepping in only when asked. The careful patience in his movements felt unfamiliar compared to the man who once walked away at the first sign of uncertainty. "You're different," she said later, when the twins ran ahead toward the playground. He glanced at her. "I hope that's a good thing." "It is," she replied softly. "You're not trying to prove anything anymore." He nodded, thoughtful. "I spent years thinking strength meant protecting myself from pain. Turns out it just kept me alone." Camila didn't respond immediately. She watched Brielle chase bubbles across the grass, Riley adjusting the kite string with focused determination. Finally she said, "People grow when they decide to stay through discomfort instead of running from it." Eric looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time he didn't see the past standing between them. He saw someone who had built a life without bitterness, someone who had allowed room for healing without demanding it. "I'm grateful you gave me space to come back," he said quietly. "I didn't give you space," she answered gently. "You found your way back on your own." Weeks turned into months. The twins began introducing him to friends as someone important without needing labels. Riley asked him to help design a science project. Brielle insisted he attend a school reading day because, in her words, "your silly voices make the stories better." One evening during dinner, Riley looked up suddenly. "Do you think people can change completely?" Eric paused, choosing his words carefully. "I think people can learn to make better choices. That's what matters." Brielle nodded as if that answer solved something important. Spring returned again, bringing the festival back to the park, the same place where everything had once felt uncertain. Colorful banners stretched across the pathways, music drifted through the air, and the scent of sweet pastries carried on the breeze. This time, Eric walked beside Camila instead of standing at a distance. Brielle and Riley raced ahead toward the game booths, their laughter blending easily with the crowd's excitement. Eric glanced around, recognizing the familiar setting, but the weight he once carried there had softened. "This place used to remind me of what I lost," he admitted. "And now?" Camila asked. He watched the twins run toward a carousel, sunlight catching their smiles. "Now it reminds me of what I almost missed." She slipped her hand into his, not dramatic, not rushed, just a quiet gesture that felt natural. They followed the twins through the festival, stopping for snacks, watching street performers, sharing small jokes that felt effortless. People greeted Eric as they always had, but this time he didn't feel defined by expectations. He felt grounded by the simple rhythm of walking beside the people who mattered. Later, as the sun dipped lower, they sat together on the grass while Brielle and Riley chased each other nearby. "You know," Camila said softly, "life doesn't always give second chances." "I know," he replied. "That's why I don't want to waste this one." She studied him for a moment, then smiled, not the careful smile she wore when protecting herself, but one that carried quiet trust. The twins ran back toward them, breathless and happy. "Family photo," Brielle announced, holding up a small camera she had borrowed from a vendor. Riley rolled his eyes but stood beside Eric anyway. Camila knelt next to them, laughter slipping into her voice as Brielle tried to frame everyone perfectly. The camera clicked. As the festival lights began to glow, Eric watched the twins chase fireflies across the field. He felt something settle inside him, a calm certainty that didn't need grand words. 5 years earlier, fear had spoken louder than love. Today, patience and honesty had rewritten that story, not by erasing mistakes, but by choosing better actions afterward. And maybe that's the real truth about second chances. They don't arrive as perfect endings. They arrive quietly, in small choices repeated again and again, in showing up, in listening, in staying even when leaving would be easier. Eric stood brushing grass from his hands and followed the twins toward the glowing lights. Camila walked beside him, her presence steady and warm. This time, there was no hesitation. This time, he didn't walk away, he stayed. And if this story reminded you that growth is possible, that sometimes the hardest lessons lead to the strongest bonds, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Because stories like this aren't just about endings. They're about the courage to keep choosing what matters most. The festival lights faded slowly as evening settled over the park. Brielle and Riley walked between Eric and Camila, each holding one of his hands as if it had always been that way. Music drifted behind them, softer now, replaced by the steady rhythm of footsteps on the quiet path leading home. "Are we getting hot chocolate?" Brielle asked hopefully. Camila laughed. "Only if someone promises to brush their teeth without a battle tonight." Riley raised his hand immediately. "I promise. No arguments." Eric smiled, glancing down at them. "I'll be the witness to that agreement." They stopped at a small cafe near the corner, not the one where everything once fell apart, but close enough that memories lingered in the air. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them, carrying the scent of cocoa and cinnamon. A simple moment, nothing dramatic, yet it held years of growth inside it. The twins claimed a booth by the window while Camila ordered drinks. Eric stood beside her at the counter, unsure how to put into words the calm settling in his chest. "You seem lighter," she said quietly. "I am," he admitted. "For a long time I thought fixing the past meant big gestures. Turns out it's just about showing up again, and again." She handed him a cup, her fingers brushing his briefly. That's what they noticed most. At the table, Riley pulled out a small notebook filled with sketches of kites and airplanes. "Look," he said proudly, "this is the one we'll build next weekend." Eric leaned closer, genuinely interested. "That's a strong design. Might even fly higher than the last one." Brielle grinned. "Everything flies higher when you're here." The simple statement made Eric pause. He looked at Camila, who watched him with quiet understanding. No grand declarations passed between them, just a shared awareness that healing had become part of their everyday life. Later, as they stepped back into the cool night air, Brielle yawned dramatically. Riley leaned against Eric's side, half asleep already. "Carry me?" Brielle asked. Eric lifted her easily, and Riley slipped his hand into his free one. Camila walked beside them, her smile soft in the glow of the street lights. "You know," she said gently, 5 years ago, I thought our story had ended." He glanced at her. Maybe it just paused until we were ready to finish it differently. She nodded, squeezing his hand lightly. The apartment door opened to familiar warmth, scattered toys, quiet laughter, and the comfort of a space built with patience. After the twins fell asleep, Eric lingered near the doorway, unsure whether to leave or stay a little longer. Camila joined him, leaning against the wall. "They trust you," she said softly. "I don't want to break that," he replied. "Then keep doing exactly what you've been doing." He hesitated before speaking again. "And you? Do you trust me?" The words settled between them like a promise neither needed to rush. Outside, the night grew quiet. Inside, the past no longer felt like a shadow hanging over them. It felt like a lesson that had shaped where they stood, not perfect, not flawless, but honest. Eric stepped closer, resting his hand lightly over hers. "I'm glad I came back." Camila smiled. "So am I." And in that quiet moment, no crowd, no music, no grand speeches, the story found its steady rhythm again. Not built on fear, not built on doubt, but on two people choosing, every day, to stay. Morning light slipped through the curtains, soft and calm, carrying the quiet promise of another ordinary day. The kind of day Eric had once overlooked, the kind he now valued the most. In the kitchen, Brielle sat at the table drawing stars across a sheet of paper, while Riley carefully measured cereal into bowls like a scientist conducting an experiment. Camila moved between them, humming softly as coffee brewed. Eric stepped inside, still adjusting the sleeves of his jacket. "Morning," he said. "Morning," Brielle answered brightly. "You're late. We already started breakfast without you." He smiled. "That sounds serious." Riley pushed a bowl toward him. "You can still catch up." He sat down, watching the simple scene unfold. Sunlight on the table, laughter in small bursts, the quiet comfort of belonging somewhere without needing to prove anything. "School today?" he asked. Camila raised an eyebrow playfully. "Looks like your calendar is filling up. I wouldn't have it any other way," he replied. After breakfast, they walked together toward the bus stop. Riley adjusted his backpack straps while Brielle practiced lines from a story she planned to read aloud in class. Eric listened closely, offering encouragement without correcting her, letting her confidence grow naturally. When the bus arrived, the twins waved from the window until it disappeared around the corner. Silence settled between Eric and Camila as they began walking back. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "they talk about you when you're not around. Good things, I hope. They talk about how you listen," she answered. "That matters more than anything else." He nodded slowly. "I'm learning that listening takes more courage than speaking sometimes." They reached the park, stopping near the swings where children's laughter echoed faintly. The place looked almost unchanged from years ago. The same benches, the same trees, Yet everything felt different now. Camila sat down, watching the empty playground. Back then I thought losing you meant losing the future I imagined. And now? He asked. Now I realize life doesn't follow one path, she said softly. It gives us new chances to grow into people we weren't ready to be before. Eric sat beside her, absorbing her words. I used to think strength meant never needing anyone. Turns out it's about letting people matter. She smiled faintly. That's a hard lesson for a lot of adults. They stayed there for a while, enjoying the quiet. No rush, no pressure. Just the steady comfort of shared presence. Later that evening, the twins returned home buzzing with stories from school. Brielle insisted on showing Eric a certificate she received for reading aloud, while Riley described every detail of a science experiment that almost went wrong. You should help me build a bigger kite this weekend, Riley said. I'm in, Eric replied without hesitation. Camila watched the exchange, noticing how natural everything had become. The past no longer defined their conversations. Instead, it quietly shaped the way they valued each moment. As night settled, they gathered on the living room floor for another story. Eric picked up the familiar book, slipping into different voices that made Brielle giggle uncontrollably, while Riley tried to hide a smile. When the story ended, Brielle leaned against Eric's shoulder. You know what I like best. What's that? He asked. You always come back, she said simply. The words landed softly but deeply. Eric glanced at Camila, who met his eyes with quiet understanding. She didn't need to say anything. The truth was already clear in the way their lives moved together now. Outside, the world carried on with its usual noise, but inside that small apartment, something steady had taken root. Not perfection, not a fairy tale ending, just real people choosing patience, honesty, and the courage to stay, one day at a time. Weekend came with clear skies and a steady breeze. Perfect kite weather, according to Riley, who had already spread papers across the living room floor before anyone else finished breakfast. This one is stronger, he explained, pointing at his sketch. If we angle the wings like this, it won't fall as fast. Eric leaned over the drawing, nodding thoughtfully. Looks like you've been studying aerodynamics. Riley grinned. I watched 3 videos and took notes. Brielle rolled her eyes playfully. He talks like a tiny professor now. Camila watched from the kitchen doorway, coffee in hand, smiling at the easy rhythm between them. There was no awkwardness anymore, just a natural flow of people who had learned how to exist together without forcing anything. At the park, the wind lifted strands of Brielle's hair as she ran ahead, carrying the bright blue kite they built together. Eric and Riley followed, adjusting the string while Camila spread a blanket on the grass. Ready? Eric asked. Riley nodded seriously. Let it go. The kite climbed quickly, rising higher than any they had made before. Brielle clapped, spinning in circles as if she had personally lifted it into the sky. It's flying, she shouted. Riley held the string tighter, pride shining in his eyes. Eric stepped back, letting him take control. Camila walked over, standing beside Eric as they watched the twins run across the field. You've become important to them, she said quietly. They've become important to me too, he answered. She studied him for a moment. I used to worry that letting you back in would reopen old wounds. And now? He asked gently. Now I see that healing doesn't erase the past, she said. It just teaches us how to move forward without carrying the weight every day. They sat together on the grass while the twins raced back and forth, laughter echoing through the open space. Eric felt a calm settle over him, not the excitement of a new beginning, but the steady comfort of something that had grown slowly over time. Later, Brielle collapsed onto the blanket, breathless. Best kite ever, she declared. Riley nodded in agreement. Next time we make one even bigger. Eric laughed softly. You two don't think small, do you? Nope, Brielle said proudly. Mom says big dreams make life interesting. Camila shook her head with a smile. I said balance makes life meaningful. They packed up as the sun began to dip lower, painting the sky with warm color. Walking home together felt effortless. Small jokes, quiet conversations, and the occasional tug of Brielle's hand when she wanted to show Eric something new. That evening, after dinner, Riley brought out his race medal and placed it carefully on the table. You said finishing strong matters, he reminded Eric. I kept thinking about that. Eric nodded. And you proved it. Brielle leaned against Camila, flipping through her storybook. Can we all go to the festival again next year? She asked. Camila exchanged a glance with Eric before answering. If everyone wants to, yes. I definitely want to, Eric said. The twins cheered softly, as if that promise meant more than any grand announcement. As night settled, the apartment filled with quiet sounds, pages turning, dishes being washed, the low hum of music playing from someone's phone. Eric stood near the window for a moment, watching the streetlights flicker on. 5 years ago, he believed walking away would keep him safe. Now he understood that safety without connection felt empty. Camila joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed lightly. "You look thoughtful." "I was just realizing how different everything feels," he admitted. "Not perfect, but real." She nodded. "Real is enough." Behind them, Brielle and Riley argued playfully over which story should be read tonight. Eric turned back toward them, smiling. "All right," he said, picking up the book. "One story each." "Deal!" "Deal!" Brielle cheered. Eric settled onto the couch between them, opening the book as Camila watched from across the room. The scene felt simple, almost ordinary, yet it held more meaning than any grand moment he had chased before, because this wasn't about fixing the past anymore. It was about living fully in the present, choosing patience, choosing honesty, choosing to stay where love had quietly grown stronger with time. A few evenings later, rain returned to the town, soft and steady, tapping gently against the apartment windows. Brielle sat cross-legged on the floor building a small paper house, while Riley carefully adjusted the tail of their newest kite, determined to make it stronger than the last one. Eric leaned against the kitchen counter, watching them with a quiet smile. Moments like this no longer felt unfamiliar. They felt earned. Camila poured tea into 2 cups and handed one to him. "You're getting used to the noise," she said. "I used to think quiet meant peace," he admitted. "Now I realize laughter can be peaceful too." She laughed softly at that. Riley looked up from his work. "Can you check this knot? I want it to hold even if the wind gets strong." Eric knelt beside him, guiding his hands rather than taking over. "Like this," he said gently. "You want it tight, but not so tight that it snaps." Brielle tilted her head. "That sounds like advice about people too." Camila raised an eyebrow, amused. "She's been reading a lot of wise books lately." Eric chuckled. "Maybe she's onto something." Later that night, they gathered around the table for dinner. Conversation moved easily. School stories, weekend plans, and Brielle's insistence that Eric should try baking cookies even though he had admitted he wasn't very good at it. "I can learn," he said. "That's your new answer to everything," Camila teased. "Because it's true," he replied. "I'm still learning." After the twins went to bed, the apartment grew quiet. Rain continued outside, a familiar sound that once reminded Eric of the day everything fell apart. Now it felt different, calmer, less heavy. Camila sat across from him, her expression thoughtful. "Do you ever regret coming back?" He shook his head without hesitation. "I regret waiting so long, but I don't regret being here now." She nodded slowly, absorbing the honesty in his voice. "You know," she said, "when they first met you, I worried they might expect too much too fast. And now, they don't expect perfection," she replied. "They just expect you to show up." He smiled faintly. "That's something I can do." The weeks that followed carried small changes. Shared grocery trips, movie nights filled with too many snacks, afternoons at the park where Riley tested new kite designs, while Brielle practiced reading stories aloud with dramatic flair. One evening at the bookstore where Camila worked, Eric helped rearrange shelves while the twins sat at a corner table drawing. A regular customer approached him quietly. "You look different," the man said. "Happier." Eric considered the comment before answering. "I stopped running from things that mattered." When they walked home later, Brielle slipped her hand into his without thinking, and Riley walked beside him describing plans for a school project. "Next year," Riley said confidently, "we should enter the kite festival in the city." Eric laughed. "You're already planning ahead." "Of course," Brielle added. "We're a team now." The words stayed with him long after they reached the apartment. That night, after stories were read and lights turned off, Eric stood by the window again. The same place where he once felt like an outsider in his own life. Now the room behind him felt warm and full, carrying the quiet sound of Camila moving through the kitchen. She joined him, leaning lightly against the frame. "What are you thinking about?" "How strange it is," he said softly, "that the life I was afraid of turned out to be the one that finally feels right." She smiled gently. "Sometimes fear points us away from exactly where we're meant to grow." He reached for her hand, holding it with quiet certainty. Outside, the rain slowed to a soft whisper. Inside, laughter and patience had turned regret into something steadier, not a perfect ending, but a real one shaped by everyday choices. And as Eric turned back toward the living room, toward the drawings on the walls and the stories waiting to be read tomorrow, he understood something simple and true. The strongest promises aren't spoken once, they're lived, one small moment at a time, in showing up, in listening, and in choosing to stay long after the storm has passed. The next morning arrived clear and bright, washing away the sound of last night's rain. Sunlight filled the apartment, stretching across the floor where Brielle had fallen asleep beside a stack of books she insisted on finishing. Eric stepped quietly into the living room, careful not to wake her. Riley sat at the table already working on a new sketch, pencil moving in small, focused lines. "You're up early," Eric said softly. Riley nodded without looking up. "I had an idea. If we make the kite wings wider, it might stay up longer." Eric pulled out a chair beside him. "Show me." They studied the drawing together while the smell of coffee drifted from the kitchen. Camila leaned against the doorway, watching the two of them talk like partners instead of strangers brought together by circumstance. "You make a good team," she said. Riley grinned. "We're always a good team." Brielle stirred awake, blinking at the sunlight. "Did I miss breakfast?" "Not yet," Camila laughed. "But you're close." The morning moved easily. Pancakes that came out slightly uneven, jokes about Eric's cooking skills, and plans for a quiet afternoon at the park. Nothing dramatic happened, and that was exactly what made it feel important. Later, as they walked along the tree-lined path, Brielle skipped ahead chasing butterflies while Riley explained the physics behind kite angles with serious enthusiasm. Eric listened patiently, occasionally glancing toward Camila as if confirming that this new rhythm was real. "You fit here," she said gently when the twins ran ahead. "I never expected to," he admitted, "but I'm grateful you didn't close the door completely." She shook her head. "I didn't keep it open for you. I kept it open for peace, for myself, for them. You chose to walk through it." They sat on a bench watching the twins play. The same park that once held painful memories now felt calm and familiar. Eric leaned back, letting the moment settle around him. "I used to believe life moved in big turning points," he said quietly. "Now I think it's shaped by small choices repeated every day." Camila nodded. "That's how real change happens." Brielle ran back toward them holding a dandelion. "Make a wish," she announced, handing it to Eric. He laughed softly. "What should I wish for?" "For more days like this," she replied. He blew gently, watching the tiny seeds drift into the air. Riley joined them, dropping onto the grass with a satisfied sigh. "Best afternoon ever," he declared. As the sun dipped lower, they walked home together, their shadows stretching across the pavement. Neighbors waved, recognizing the quiet happiness in the way they moved as a group. That evening, the twins insisted on another story. Eric opened the book, slipping into different voices that made Brielle giggle, while Riley pretended not to be amused. Camila watched from the couch, her expression calm and thoughtful. She saw the change clearly, not just in Eric, but in herself too. The fear that once lived between them had softened into trust, built slowly over time. When the story ended, Brielle yawned and curled up beside him. "You're staying tomorrow too, right?" "Yes," he said gently. "I'm not going anywhere." Camila met his eyes across the room, and in that quiet exchange there was understanding, not about the past, but about the future they were building together, step by step. Outside, the evening settled into stillness. Inside, laughter faded into soft breathing as the twins fell asleep, and Eric closed the book carefully, realizing that the greatest change in his life hadn't arrived through grand gestures or dramatic moments. It had come through patience, honesty, and the courage to remain present, choosing, every day, to stay where love had quietly grown stronger than fear. Days blended into weeks, and the rhythm of their lives settled into something steady and familiar. One afternoon, a bookstore closed early for inventory, so Camila brought the twins to the small community hall where a reading event was being held. Rows of chairs filled the room, parents chatting quietly while children flipped through colorful pages. Brielle tugged Eric toward the front. "You promised you'd hear me read today." "I wouldn't miss it," he said, taking a seat beside Riley. When Brielle stepped up to the microphone, her voice started soft but grew stronger with every sentence. She glanced at Eric once, then at Camila, and smiled with quiet confidence. The applause at the end wasn't loud, but it was genuine, and Eric felt an unexpected tightness in his chest. "She gets that bravery from her mom," he whispered to Riley. Riley nodded proudly. "And maybe a little from you." After the event, they walked through town together, stopping at a small bakery where the twins debated between chocolate pastries and cinnamon rolls. Eric watched Camila laugh as Brielle tried to convince the baker to give them just one extra, and he realized how natural everything felt now. No hesitation, no uncertainty about where he belonged. Outside, they sat at a small table, sharing pastries while the late afternoon sun warmed the street. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" Camila asked quietly. He considered the question before answering. "Sometimes, but I don't stay there long, because if everything had gone perfectly back then, maybe I wouldn't have learned how to be the person I am now." She smiled softly. "Growth rarely comes from comfort." Riley wiped sugar from his hands. "Next week there's a kite competition in the park. We should enter." Brielle clapped excitedly. "Yes, our kite is the best one anyway," Eric laughed. "Then we better start preparing." The competition day arrived with a gentle breeze, not too strong, just enough to carry colorful kites high into the sky. Families gathered across the field, children running with strings trailing behind them. When Riley released their kite, it lifted smoothly, climbing higher and higher until it caught a steady current. Brielle cheered loudly, and even Camilla laughed as Eric helped guide the string. "We did it," Riley said, eyes shining. "No," Eric corrected gently. "You did it." They didn't win first place, but as the sun dipped lower and the sky filled with color, it didn't matter. They sat together on the grass, sharing snacks and stories, watching their kites sway gently above them. Camilla leaned closer to Eric. "You know, 5 years ago I thought our story ended in a cafe with rain against the windows." He nodded slowly. "And now? Now I think it was just the beginning of something slower, something stronger." He reached for her hand, holding it with quiet certainty. Nearby, Brielle and Riley chased each other through the grass, laughter echoing across the field. The sight filled Eric with a calm he had never known before, not the excitement of a new chapter, but the peace of one that had finally found its direction. As evening settled, they packed up and started toward home together, the kite folded carefully under Riley's arm. No grand speeches, no dramatic promises, just footsteps moving in the same direction, side by side. And for Eric Spencer, that simple truth meant more than anything else, because this time, he wasn't running from the life in front of him. He was walking into it, choosing every day to stay exactly where he was meant to be. Summer settled gently over the town, bringing longer evenings and warm air that carried the sound of distant music from open windows. The apartment felt brighter these days. Drawings taped along the walls, kites stacked neatly near the door, and a quiet sense of routine that had grown without anyone forcing it. One evening, Brielle spread a blanket across the living room floor. "Movie night," she announced proudly. "No work, no phones." Riley nodded in agreement. "Rules are rules." Eric laughed, placing a bowl of popcorn in the center. "I guess I don't get a vote?" Camilla shook her head playfully. "Not tonight." They sat close together, arguing over which movie to watch until Brielle finally made the decision for everyone. As the story played, Eric found himself watching the twins more than the screen. The way Riley tried not to laugh too loudly, the way Brielle leaned against Camilla without thinking. Moments like this once felt distant from him, something other people experienced. Now they felt real. After the movie ended, the twins raced to brush their teeth, determined to prove they could keep promises without reminders. Eric helped tidy the room, while Camilla folded the blanket. "You've become part of their everyday life," she said softly. "I didn't expect it to happen so naturally," he admitted. "I thought rebuilding trust would feel heavier." "It was heavy at first," she replied gently, "but you stayed long enough for it to become normal." They stood quietly for a moment, listening to the sound of laughter drifting from the hallway. Later that week, the twins convinced Eric to join them at a small art fair near the river. Brielle painted bright stars across a canvas while Riley carefully built a miniature glider from recycled materials. Camilla watched from a nearby bench, her expression peaceful. A passerby paused beside her. "You have a beautiful family," the woman said kindly. Camilla glanced at Eric helping Riley adjust the glider and smiled. "We're still learning what that means. But yes, it feels right." As the sun began to set, they walked along the riverbank, the sky glowing in soft shades of gold. Brielle skipped ahead collecting smooth stones, while Riley explained his latest invention idea with serious enthusiasm. Eric slowed beside Camilla. "Do you ever think about that day in the cafe?" She considered the question, carefully. "Sometimes, but it doesn't hurt the way it used to. I wish I could take those words back," he said quietly. She met his eyes with calm understanding. "You can't erase the past, but you've changed the ending." He nodded, grateful for her honesty. When they reached a quiet spot near the water, Brielle turned suddenly. "Let's take a picture." They gathered close, Riley holding the camera carefully while Brielle counted down. The photo captured laughter, sunlight, and the simple closeness they had built piece by piece. Back at the apartment that night, Eric sat at the table helping Riley finish a small project, while Camilla read beside Brielle on the couch. The room felt full in a quiet, steady way. Not loud, not dramatic, just warm. "You know what I like best?" Brielle said suddenly, closing her book. "What's that?" Eric asked. "You didn't try to be perfect," she answered. "You just stayed." Camilla glanced at him, her eyes soft. He smiled gently. "Staying turned out to be the most important choice I ever made." Outside, summer air drifted through the open window, carrying distant laughter from neighbors. Inside, the small apartment held everything that mattered: patience, forgiveness, and the simple joy of people choosing each other again and again. And as the lights dimmed and another ordinary day came to an end, Eric realized something he once never believed. They're about the quiet middle, the place where love grows slowly, where trust rebuilds itself through everyday moments, and where someone finally learns that staying can be the bravest decision of all. As summer eased toward autumn again, the town settled into a softer rhythm. Leaves began to turn along Maple Avenue, brushing the sidewalks with warm color. Eric noticed the change one afternoon while walking beside Camila and the twins toward the cafe near the corner. Not the same one where everything had once fallen apart, but close enough to remind him how far they had come. Brielle swung their joined hands as they walked. "Can we sit by the window today?" she asked. "If it's free," Camila replied. Riley carried a small notebook filled with new kite designs, already talking about improvements for the next festival season. Eric listened, nodding along, feeling the quiet satisfaction that came from being part of these everyday conversations. Inside the cafe, the warmth wrapped around them instantly. They found a table near the glass, sunlight catching the edges of Brielle's drawings as she spread them across the surface. "You've improved a lot," Eric said, studying her sketches. She beamed. "I practice every day." Camila watched the exchange, her eyes thoughtful. There was no tension here anymore. No hesitation in the way they spoke or laughed. Just familiarity built over time. After their drinks arrived, Riley looked up suddenly. "Do you think people always get second chances?" Eric paused before answering. "Not always. But when they do, it's important to recognize them." Brielle nodded seriously, as if storing that thought for later. When they left the cafe, the air felt cooler than before. The park nearby carried the quiet sound of children playing, and without planning it, they wandered toward the swings, the same place where Eric once struggled to understand his own fears. He sat beside Camila on a bench while the twins raced ahead. "You've changed," she said softly, watching him. "I had to," he admitted. "I didn't like who I was when fear made my decisions." She smiled gently. "Growth isn't about becoming someone new. It's about returning to the parts of yourself you stopped trusting." He leaned back, absorbing her words. The breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves, and for a moment everything felt still. Not empty, just peaceful. Brielle ran back toward them, breathless. "Look!" Riley made the kite fly without even running. Riley followed proudly, holding the string steady as the kite floated above them. Eric stood, helping guide the line while Camila watched with a soft laugh. Later, as evening approached, they walked home together beneath trees glowing with autumn color. The twins talked nonstop about school projects and future plans, their voices blending into the quiet rhythm of footsteps on the pavement. At the apartment, Brielle insisted on another story before bed. Eric opened the familiar book, slipping into exaggerated voices that made her giggle, while Riley pretended to be unimpressed. When the twins finally fell asleep, Eric sat beside Camila on the couch, the room lit only by a small lamp. "Do you ever think about where we'll be 5 years from now?" he asked. She considered the question, her gaze steady. "I don't think that far ahead anymore. I just focus on what we're building now." He nodded slowly. "That sounds peaceful." "It is," she replied, "because the future grows from what we do today." They sat quietly for a while, the apartment filled with a calm that felt earned. Outside, leaves rustled softly against the windows, marking the start of another season. Eric realized that the story he once believed had ended in regret had transformed into something steadier, not a perfect ending, but a life shaped by patience, forgiveness, and everyday choices. And as he stood to turn off the light, he felt a quiet certainty settle within him. This time, there was no fear guiding his steps, only the simple, steady decision to stay, today, tomorrow, and every day that followed. Another season moved quietly through their lives, not marked by dramatic change, but by the steady rhythm they had built together. One cool evening, Camila stood by the kitchen window watching Brielle and Riley spread school papers across the table, while Eric helped them organize a small project. The scene felt ordinary, pencils rolling across wood, soft laughter rising and falling, yet it carried a quiet weight she didn't take for granted. "Okay," Riley said seriously, pointing at a chart he had drawn. "If we divide the sections like this, everyone gets a turn to explain something." Eric nodded. "That's good teamwork." Brielle tapped her pencil against her chin. "And I'll decorate the board so it looks interesting." Camila smiled, realizing how naturally Eric had blended into moments like this. He didn't take over, he supported. He listened, he stayed. Later, when the twins went to brush their teeth, Eric leaned back in his chair with a small sigh. "Long day?" she asked. "Good day," he corrected gently. "Just full." She poured 2 cups of tea and handed one to him. They stood close together, the quiet hum of the apartment wrapping around them. "You know," she said thoughtfully, "I used to believe healing would feel like a big moment. Some clear line between before and after. And now? Now I think it feels like this," she answered, gesturing toward the living room, where the twins' laughter echoed faintly. Small moments adding up. He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The following weekend brought another community festival, smaller than the spring one but just as lively. Brielle dragged Eric toward the art booths while Riley searched for new kite materials, already planning improvements for the next season. Camila walked beside them, her steps relaxed. She noticed how Eric greeted neighbors warmly now, no longer carrying the guarded distance he once wore like armor. At one booth, Brielle insisted they paint a shared canvas. Riley added careful lines, Camila blended soft colors, and Eric filled the background with wide, patient strokes. When they finished, the painting wasn't perfect, but it felt honest. "We should hang it at home," Brielle said proudly. "Definitely," Eric agreed. As evening fell, music drifted across the park, and they settled onto the grass to watch the lights flicker on. Riley rested against Eric's shoulder while Brielle leaned into Camila, the simple closeness feeling natural and unforced. "This is my favorite part," Brielle whispered. "When everyone just sits together." Eric glanced at Camila, her expression calm and warm. "Mine too," he said softly. Walking home under the glow of streetlights, Riley suddenly spoke up. "You know what's different now?" "What?" Eric asked. "You don't look like you're going to leave anymore," Riley said matter-of-factly. The honesty of the comment caught him off guard. He looked at Camila, then back at Riley. "I'm not," he said quietly. "I'm exactly where I want to be." Back at the apartment, they hung the painting on the wall above the couch. Brielle stepped back, hands on her hips. "It makes the room feel bigger, or maybe warmer," Camila said. Eric stood beside them, studying the canvas, uneven lines, bright colors, and small imperfections that somehow made it more meaningful. Later that night, after stories were read and lights dimmed, he lingered by the window, watching the quiet street below. Camila joined him, her presence steady. "You found your place," she said. "I didn't find it," he replied gently. "We built it." She smiled, resting her hand in his. Outside, the world moved on as it always did, seasons changing, people passing by. But inside that small apartment, something lasting had taken root. Not a perfect ending, not a flawless beginning, just a real story shaped by patience, forgiveness, and the simple courage to stay, again and again, every single day. The apartment grew quiet as night settled in, the kind of calm that comes after a full day lived well. Brielle's drawing hung above the couch beside the shared painting from the festival, bright colors catching the soft glow of a nearby lamp. Riley had fallen asleep with a notebook open beside him, pencil still tucked between his fingers. Eric closed the book he had been reading aloud, lowering his voice to a whisper so he wouldn't wake them. Camila watched from the doorway, her expression thoughtful and warm. "They fall asleep faster when you read," she said quietly. He smiled. "Maybe they just pretend so they don't have to admit they like the stories." She laughed softly, stepping into the room. Together they adjusted the blankets, moving carefully so the twins wouldn't stir. Moments like this had become routine, small acts of care that felt natural rather than deliberate. In the kitchen, Camila poured 2 glasses of water while Eric leaned against the counter. The window was open slightly, letting in cool evening air and distant sounds from neighbors talking outside. "You know," she said, "there was a time when I wondered if peace would ever feel normal again. And now?" he asked gently. "Now it feels like something we built together," she replied. He nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The journey back into each other's lives hadn't been loud or dramatic. It had been shaped by patience, by consistency, by choosing presence over pride. The next morning, Brielle burst into the kitchen holding a school flyer. "Family day at the park," she announced. "We have to go." Riley glanced up from his cereal. "There's a kite demonstration, too." Eric raised an eyebrow playfully. "Sounds like a busy weekend." "It's important," Brielle insisted. "Everyone bring someone special." Camila met Eric's eyes, a quiet question passing between them. "I'll be there," he said simply. Family day arrived with bright skies and gentle wind, the park filled with laughter, picnic blankets, and colorful kites rising into the air. Brielle led Eric toward a crafts station while Riley discussed flight angles with a volunteer who looked impressed by his knowledge. Camila watched from a distance, her heart settling into a calm rhythm. The scene felt so different from 5 years ago. No uncertainty, no heavy silence, just people choosing to share moments together. Later, as the sun dipped lower, the twins ran back toward them holding ribbons they had won in a small contest. "We didn't come first," Riley said, "but we did really well." Eric crouched beside him. "Effort matters more than rankings." Brielle slipped her hand into his. "Can we take another picture?" They gathered close, laughter filling the air as someone nearby helped capture the moment. When the photo was done, Camila studied it briefly. 4 people standing shoulder to shoulder, not defined by the past but shaped by the choices they had made since. On the walk home, Riley spoke quietly. "You know, It doesn't feel like you're visiting anymore. Eric glanced down at him. That's because I'm not. Brielle nodded. You belong here. Camila's eyes softened at the words. She didn't interrupt, letting the moment settle naturally. Back at the apartment, they placed the new photo beside the others on a small shelf. Eric looked at the collection, snapshots of festivals, kite days, quiet evenings, each one marking a step forward. I used to think life changed in one big moment, he said softly. And now? Camila asked. Now I think it changes in quiet ways, he replied. Through patience, through staying. She smiled, resting her hand over his. Outside, evening light faded slowly, carrying the promise of another ordinary day ahead. More laughter, more learning, more small moments that didn't need to be perfect to matter. And as the apartment filled with the gentle sound of conversation and shared plans, Eric realized something simple and true. The truth that once took 5 years to reveal had grown into something stronger than regret, a life built not on fear, but on the quiet courage to keep showing up, to keep choosing love, and to stay exactly where his heart had finally learned to belong. The following weeks carried a calm rhythm that felt almost effortless. School mornings began with laughter over breakfast, afternoons filled with homework and kite sketches, and evenings shaped by stories read aloud until sleep softened the edges of the day. One Friday, Brielle rushed through the door waving a small invitation card. There's a class celebration next week, she announced. We're supposed to bring someone important to us. Riley looked up from the couch. That sounds serious. It is, she insisted, turning toward Eric. Will you come with us? He didn't hesitate. Of course. Camila watched quietly from the kitchen, warmth settling in her chest at how naturally the question had been asked, and answered. The day of the celebration arrived bright and lively. Children filled the classroom with chatter while parents and friends stood along the walls, smiling at handmade decorations. Brielle proudly introduced Eric to her teacher, and Riley explained a small science display he had worked on all week. You've done a great job, Eric told him. Riley straightened a little, pride shining through his calm expression. Afterward, they walked through town together, stopping at a small park where autumn leaves drifted slowly to the ground. Brielle collected the brightest ones she could find, arranging them into patterns on a bench while Riley practiced balancing the kite string against the breeze. Camila sat beside Eric, watching the twins with quiet contentment. Do you remember the first time we met here? She asked. He nodded. I remember thinking I had everything figured out. And now? Now I know that certainty isn't the same as understanding, he said softly. Sometimes you only see the truth after time gives you distance. She smiled, her gaze steady. You've grown a lot. So have you, he replied. They stayed until the sky began to dim, then headed home with Brielle humming softly and Riley explaining plans for the next kite design. Inside the apartment, the walls felt alive with memories, drawings, photos, and small reminders of how far they had come. That evening after dinner, Brielle insisted on one more story. Eric settled onto the couch between the twins, opening the familiar book. Ready? He asked. Always, Riley answered. As his voice filled the room, Camila leaned against the doorway, watching the scene unfold. There was no rush anymore, no lingering fear that everything might disappear. Just a quiet understanding that love didn't need grand declarations. It lived in the everyday moments they shared. When the story ended, Brielle whispered sleepily, I'm glad you stayed. Eric brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. Me too. Later, after the twins drifted into dreams, he and Camila sat by the window, the city lights glowing softly outside. You know, she said, 5 years ago I never imagined we'd end up here. Neither did I, he admitted, but I'm grateful we did. They sat in comfortable silence, hands loosely intertwined, the past no longer a shadow but a chapter that had shaped something stronger. And as another quiet night settled around them, the truth of their journey felt clear. Sometimes the most meaningful endings aren't loud or dramatic. They arrive gently, through patience, forgiveness, and the simple choice to stay, day after day, until what once felt broken becomes whole again. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden, touching the edges of the room where Brielle's drawings and Riley's kite designs covered the walls. Eric moved quietly through the kitchen, preparing breakfast while the twins argued over which story should be read at school that day. You picked yesterday, Brielle said, hands on her hips. Eric set 2 plates on the table. Sounds like we need a fair system. Camila laughed softly from the doorway. Good luck solving that debate. They sat together, the conversation shifting from stories to weekend plans. It felt easy, no effort needed to keep the moment alive. Eric watched the twins laugh and realized how different his mornings had become. There was no rush to escape silence anymore. The noise itself felt comforting. After school drop-off, he and Camila walked slowly toward the park. Leaves drifted down from the trees and the air carried a quiet calm. "You found a rhythm with them," she said. "They taught me more than I expected," he admitted. "Patience, listening, staying present." She nodded. "You've always had those qualities. You just didn't trust them before." They sat on a bench watching a group of children play near the swings. The scene reminded Eric of the first time they had talked about trust, a conversation that once felt uncertain but now felt distant. Later that afternoon, Brielle burst through the door holding a small ribbon from her school event. "We won a reading prize," she said proudly. Riley followed behind with a paper airplane, and my design flew the farthest. Eric clapped. "Sounds like a successful day." Camila watched him kneel beside them, celebrating every detail with genuine excitement. The warmth in her chest grew stronger, a quiet reassurance that their lives had found balance again. Evening settled gently as they gathered for dinner. Stories flowed easily, teachers' jokes, playground adventures, and plans for another kite-building weekend. Afterward, Brielle insisted on music while Riley organized materials on the floor, already imagining improvements. When night finally arrived, Eric read one more chapter from their favorite book, his voice steady and warm. Brielle fell asleep first, followed by Riley, leaving the room wrapped in soft quiet. Camila joined him by the window, her hand slipping into his naturally. "Do you ever think about how much has changed?" she asked. "All the time," he replied. "But what surprises me most is how simple happiness feels now." She smiled gently. "That's because it's real." Outside, the streetlights flickered on, casting a soft glow across the pavement. Inside, the apartment felt full, not with grand achievements, but with shared moments that carried deeper meaning. Eric turned toward her, gratitude clear in his eyes. "Thank you for giving me another chance to learn how to stay. You chose to come back," she said softly. "That made all the difference." They stood there for a while, listening to the quiet breathing of the twins and the distant sounds of the night beyond the window. And in that calm space, their story felt complete, not because every mistake had been erased, but because they had transformed regret into something stronger, a life built on patience, forgiveness, and the courage to keep choosing each other, one ordinary day at a time. The next few days passed in a gentle rhythm, the kind that no longer felt fragile. Morning laughter, afternoon homework, and evenings filled with small routines had turned into the foundation of their lives. One Saturday, Riley spread a large sheet of paper across the table. "This is the final design," he announced proudly. "Our biggest kite yet." Brielle clapped. "It needs bright colors, something happy." Eric leaned over the drawing, studying the careful lines. "Looks like a strong frame," he said. "What should we call it?" Riley thought for a moment. "Second chance." Camila glanced at Eric, her smile quiet but meaningful. They spent the afternoon cutting paper, tying knots, and testing balance in the living room. Laughter filled the space whenever the structure tilted too far to one side, and even Camila joined in, adding small touches of color along the edges. At the park, the wind lifted the new kite easily. It climbed higher than any of the others, steady and bright against the sky. Brielle spun in circles while Riley guided the string carefully, pride glowing across his face. "It's perfect," Brielle said. "Not perfect," Eric corrected gently. "Just built with care." Camila watched them, remembering how different life had felt years ago. Uncertain, heavy with unanswered questions. Now everything felt lighter, grounded in small choices made again and again. As evening settled, they sat together on the grass, the kite floating above them like a quiet symbol of everything they had rebuilt. "Do you think we'll still come here years from now?" Brielle asked. "I hope so," Camila said softly. Riley nodded. "We'll make even bigger kites." Eric smiled. "And we'll keep learning how to fly them better." They walked home slowly, carrying the folded kite between them. Streetlights flickered on, casting warm circles of light along the path. Inside the apartment, Brielle hung a new drawing beside the others while Riley carefully stored the kite near the door. Eric stood back, looking at the room, every corner filled with memories they had created together. Camila joined him, her hand brushing his. "You look thoughtful." "I was just realizing something," he said. 5 years ago I thought walking away would protect me. Now I understand that staying takes more courage and brings more peace." She nodded, her expression calm. "And you chose it." Later that night, after stories were read and the twins drifted into sleep, Eric and Camila sat by the window watching the quiet street below. The past no longer felt like a weight between them. It felt like a lesson that had guided them towards something steadier. Outside, the world moved on with its usual rhythm, seasons changing, lights fading one by one. Inside, their story rested in a place that didn't need dramatic endings or grand declarations, just patience, just honesty, and the simple, powerful decision to stay, today, tomorrow, and every day that followed. Another quiet morning arrived, carrying the soft sounds of birds outside the window and the familiar shuffle of Brielle searching for her favorite book before school. Riley sat at the table adjusting a small paper wing he insisted would make their next kite faster than the wind, while Camila poured coffee and watched the scene with a gentle smile. "Reading circle," Brielle announced proudly. "And I'm using my strongest voice." Riley nodded seriously. "And I'm presenting my design idea." "Sounds like I need to be ready to celebrate later," Eric said. They left together, the walk to the bus stop filled with easy conversation. The twins talked over each other, laughter echoing down the street, and Eric found himself slowing his pace just to stay in the moment a little longer. After the bus disappeared around the corner, he and Camila lingered on the sidewalk. "You know," she said softly, "there was a time when I wondered if everything we built would feel fragile. And now?" He asked. "Now it feels steady," she replied. "Not because life is perfect, but because we learned how to face it together." He nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. That afternoon, Brielle ran through the door, holding a small certificate. "I did it," she said, breathless. "My reading was the loudest." Riley followed with a proud grin. "And my project got extra points." Eric knelt down, pulling them both into a quick hug. "I knew you would." Camila watched from the kitchen, her eyes warm. The sight of them together, laughter, encouragement, small celebrations, felt like a quiet answer to years of uncertainty. Later, they gathered at the park again, the place that had become a symbol of their new beginning. Riley tested another kite while Brielle chased falling leaves, and Eric walked beside Camila under the fading light. "I used to think life gave us only one chance to get things right," he said thoughtfully. "And now?" she asked. "Now I think it gives us opportunities to grow into better versions of ourselves," he answered. She smiled, her hand slipping into his. "That sounds like something you would have never said before." Eric stepped into the room, tying the laces of his shoes. "Big plans today?" he asked. "You're right," he admitted. "Back then I was too busy protecting myself." They watched as Riley's kite lifted into the air, steady and strong, Brielle cheering from below. As evening settled, they walked home together, carrying the quiet satisfaction of another day shared. Inside the apartment, Brielle insisted on one more story. Eric read aloud while Riley listened closely, and Camila sat nearby, letting the calm fill the room. When the twins finally fell asleep, Eric closed the book gently. "I never thought ordinary days could feel this meaningful," he said softly. Camila leaned her head against his shoulder. "That's the beauty of real life. It grows slowly." Outside, the night deepened, wrapping the world in stillness. Inside, their story rested in a place beyond doubt, shaped by patience, forgiveness, and the simple courage to keep showing up. And as Eric turned off the light, he felt something steady settle within him. This wasn't just a second chance, it was a new chapter written not with fear but with quiet, lasting love, the kind that grows stronger every time someone chooses to stay. A gentle breeze moved through the open window, carrying the scent of evening rain that had just passed. The apartment felt calm, wrapped in the quiet rhythm that had become so familiar to all of them. Brielle sat cross-legged on the floor, arranging colored pencils into careful rows, while Riley adjusted the tail of their newest kite. Eric watched from the couch, smiling at the seriousness with which they treated every small task. "You two work harder than most adults I know," he joked. Riley looked up, thoughtful. "That's because we want things to last." Camila glanced over from the kitchen, her expression soft at the simple truth in his words. Dinner that night was filled with easy conversation, school stories, plans for the weekend, and Brielle's insistence that Eric needed to learn a new reading voice for their favorite book. Nothing felt forced anymore. Even silence carried comfort instead of uncertainty. After the dishes were cleared, they walked to the balcony together. Street lights glowed below, and distant laughter echoed from neighbors returning home. "Do you remember the first time we stood somewhere like this?" Camila asked quietly. Eric nodded. "I was afraid of saying the wrong thing, and now I'm not afraid of staying quiet," he replied. "Because being here already says enough." She smiled, her hand resting lightly in his. Inside, the twins argued playfully over which story would be read before bed. Eric finally raised his hands in surrender. "All right, one chapter each, no negotiations." Brielle cheered while Riley pretended to be unimpressed, though a small smile gave him away. Later, as Eric read aloud, his voice filled the room with warmth. Brielle leaned against his shoulder, and Riley listened closely, occasionally correcting small details from memory. Camila watched from the doorway, realizing how naturally everything had settled into place. No longer fragile, no longer uncertain. When the lights dimmed and the twins drifted into sleep, Eric closed the book gently. "They trust you completely," Camila said softly. "I trust them too," he answered. They sat together by the window, the night stretching quietly beyond the glass. I used to think love had to be loud to be real, he said after a moment. But this calm feels stronger than anything I've known. Camila nodded. Because it's built slowly. Outside, clouds drifted across the sky, and the world moved on as it always did. Inside, their lives felt steady, shaped not by one perfect moment, but by hundreds of small choices that had led them here. Eric looked around the room, the drawings, the kites, the photos lined carefully along the shelf, and felt a quiet gratitude settle in his chest. 5 years earlier, fear had pushed him away from the life standing right in front of him. Now, patience and honesty had guided him back. And as he turned off the last light and stepped into the hallway beside Camila, he understood something simple and lasting. The greatest proof of love wasn't in grand promises. It was in the quiet decision to stay, every day, every season, and every ordinary moment that followed. The next morning arrived quietly, wrapped in soft sunlight that filtered through the curtains. Brielle was already awake, sitting near the window sketching something carefully, her tongue peeking out in concentration. Riley stood beside the table adjusting a small spool of string, determined to test a new idea before school. Usual, he said. Eric stepped into the room carrying 2 mugs of warm tea. You're both up earlier than. We had an idea, Riley explained, eyes bright. If we change the angle just a little, the kite might stay up even when the wind slows down. Brielle held up her drawing. And I'm designing a new pattern for it. Camila watched from the doorway, leaning lightly against the frame. There was something peaceful about seeing them work together. No rush, no tension, just shared focus. You've turned mornings into workshops, she teased. Eric laughed softly. I think I'm the assistant now. After breakfast, they walked the twins to the bus stop. Brielle practiced reading lines under her breath while Riley explained the physics of airflow for the 100th time, determined to perfect every detail. When the bus drove away, Eric and Camila lingered a little longer than usual. It still surprises me, he admitted, how natural everything feels now. She nodded slowly. Because you stopped fighting the moment you were in. They walked back toward the apartment together, the quiet street carrying the calm of a new day. That afternoon, the twins returned home buzzing with energy. Brielle rushed inside, waving a paper star. I got chosen to read again next week. Riley followed, carefully holding a small trophy from a science challenge. Second place, he said, trying to sound casual even though pride showed in his eyes. Eric crouched down to meet them. That's incredible. Both of you. Camila watched the small celebration unfold. High fives, laughter, promises of a special dinner, and felt gratitude settle gently in her chest. Later they gathered in the park for another kite test. The wind moved steadily, lifting the bright design Riley had worked on all week. Brielle ran in wide circles beneath it, her laughter echoing across the grass. It's flying higher than before, she shouted. Riley held the string with careful focus while Eric stood behind him, offering quiet guidance instead of taking control. Camila sat on a nearby bench, watching the scene with a soft smile. 5 years ago, she had never imagined moments like this, simple, steady, full of warmth. As evening approached, they walked home beneath a sky glowing with soft color. Inside the apartment, Brielle insisted on hanging her new star beside the other drawings, while Riley carefully placed his trophy near the window. Eric stood back, taking in the room, the life they had built piece by piece. You look thoughtful, Camila said. I was just realizing something, he replied. Happiness used to feel like something far away. Now it feels ordinary, in the best way. She slipped her hand into his. Ordinary can be beautiful. That night, as stories were read and lights slowly dimmed, the apartment settled into quiet again. The twins drifted into sleep, their soft breathing filling the room with calm. Eric and Camila stood by the window for a moment, watching the stars appear one by one. No rush, no fear, just the steady feeling of being exactly where they were meant to be. And as the night wrapped gently around them, their story continued, not through grand endings, but through small, meaningful days that proved something simple and lasting. Sometimes the truest kind of love grows quietly, in laughter shared, in trust rebuilt, and in the choice to stay long after the hardest moments have passed. Another quiet evening settled over the apartment, the kind that felt familiar in the best way. Brielle sat at the table coloring a new design for their next kite while Riley carefully sorted through a box of strings, determined to find the strongest one. Eric leaned against the wall, watching them with an easy smile. You two never run out of ideas. That's because we don't like boring things, Brielle said, not looking up. Riley nodded seriously. And we learn from every try. Camila stepped in from the kitchen carrying a plate of sliced fruit. She paused for a moment, taking in the scene. The laughter, the quiet focus, the calm that had replaced the uncertainty of years before. "All right," she said gently. 10 more minutes, then stories in bed. The twins groaned dramatically, but neither stopped working. Later, the living room filled with the soft sound of Eric's voice as he read aloud. Brielle leaned against his shoulder while Riley listened with careful attention, occasionally correcting small details he remembered from earlier chapters. Camila watched from the couch, her eyes warm. These moments didn't need to be big or extraordinary to matter. They simply needed to exist, steady, real, and shared. "Of course," Eric said softly. Riley nodded approvingly. "Good. You're getting better at the voices." They laughed quietly as the twins headed off to sleep. The apartment grew still, filled only with the faint hum of the night outside. Eric joined Camila near the window. Streetlights glowed softly below, and the world beyond felt distant compared to the peace inside. "Do you ever think about how different things could have turned out?" he asked. She considered the question for a moment. "Sometimes. But I don't hold on to those thoughts anymore. What we have now feels more important." He nodded slowly. "I used to think second chances were about fixing mistakes. Now I think they're about learning how to live better going forward." Camila smiled, her hand resting gently in his. "That sounds like growth." They stood quietly together, watching the night settle over the street. Inside the apartment, the walls held drawings, photos, and memories that marked the path they had taken, not perfect but honest. Each small moment had shaped something stronger than regret. This wasn't just a happy ending. It was a life built on patience, forgiveness, and the simple courage to keep showing up, choosing, day after day, to stay exactly where love had found its way back. The apartment rested in a soft hush after the lights went out, the quiet kind that felt safe rather than empty. Outside, a gentle breeze moved through the trees, carrying the faint sound of wind chimes from a nearby balcony. Morning arrived slowly, bringing with it the warm smell of toast and the sound of Riley flipping through his notebook again. "I made an improvement," he said as Eric walked into the kitchen. "The tail needs more balance, not more weight." Eric pulled out a chair beside him. "Show me what you changed." Brielle joined them moments later, her hair still messy from sleep. "And I added new colors," she announced, sliding a page covered in bright stars across the table. Camila watched the three of them from the stove, a quiet smile settling on her face. These mornings no longer felt uncertain. They felt steady, built from small routines that had grown stronger over time. After breakfast, they walked together toward the park. The sky stretched wide and clear above them, and the twins ran ahead, arguing about which kite would fly highest. Eric slowed beside Camila. "I used to think happiness had to be something big and obvious," he said thoughtfully. "Now I realize it's this, walking together without worrying about what comes next." She nodded gently. "Peace often looks simple from the outside." At the field, Riley launched the kite while Brielle cheered loudly, her laughter echoing across the open space. The kite lifted smoothly into the sky, steady against the breeze. "It's our best one yet," Riley said, eyes shining. Eric placed a hand on his shoulder. "Because you didn't give up on improving it." Camila sat on the grass watching them, the sunlight catching the edges of her smile. She remembered the uncertainty that once lived between them, the long years filled with questions, and felt grateful for how far they had come. As afternoon turned into evening, they packed up and headed home, the twins talking non-stop about their next plans. Inside the apartment, Brielle carefully hung another drawing on the wall, while Riley lined up the kites near the door like trophies. Eric stood back, taking it all in, the laughter, the warmth, the quiet sense of belonging he once thought he had lost forever. "You're smiling," Camila said softly. "I was just thinking," he replied, "how different everything feels when you stop running from what matters." She slipped her hand into his, her voice calm. "And you chose to stay." That night, after another story and another round of sleepy good nights, the apartment settled into silence again. Eric stood by the window for a moment, watching the glow of the streetlights below. 5 years earlier, he believed fear had protected him. Now he understood that love had simply been waiting, patient enough to grow again when he was finally ready to listen. He turned away from the window, joining Camila in the quiet hallway. No grand promises needed to be spoken, because the truth had already shown itself in every shared day, every small choice, every moment he stayed when leaving would have been easier. And as the night wrapped gently around their home, their story moved forward, not toward a perfect ending, but toward something better. A life shaped by forgiveness, strengthened by time, and carried forward by the simple, steady decision to remain together. The following morning began quietly, sunlight slipping through the curtains and resting softly across the living room floor. Brielle hummed to herself while arranging her colored pencils into neat lines, and Riley studied a small notebook filled with new ideas for their next kite. Eric leaned against the doorway, watching them with a calm smile that came more easily these days. "You two never really stop planning, do you?" "Good ideas don't wait," Riley said seriously. Brielle held up a new drawing. "And every kite needs a story. This one is about flying home." Camila paused at the counter, her eyes soft at the words. She didn't interrupt. She simply let the moment unfold. After breakfast, they walked to the park together. The air felt warm and steady, and the trees cast long shadows across the grass. Riley released the kite while Brielle ran beneath it, her laughter carrying across the open space. Eric stood beside Camila, watching the twins move freely, their joy untouched by the doubts that once shaped his decisions. "You look peaceful," she said quietly. "I am," he admitted. "I used to believe happiness was something I had to chase. Now I know it grows when you stop running." She smiled, slipping her hand into his as they watched the kite rise higher. Later, back at the apartment, Brielle hung her newest drawing beside the others, bright stars and soft colors filling the wall. Riley adjusted the kites near the door, lining them up carefully as if each one marked a memory. Eric stepped back, taking in the room. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't grand. But it felt real in a way he had never allowed himself to experience before. "You've built something strong here," he said softly. "We all did," Camila replied. That evening, as they gathered for another story, Brielle leaned against Eric while Riley listened with quiet focus. The room glowed with warm light, and for a moment time felt still. When the last page closed, Brielle whispered sleepily, "I like when stories end happy." Eric brushed a strand of hair from her face. "The best stories don't really end, they just keep growing." After the twins fell asleep, he and Camila stood by the window again, watching the stars appear one by one. "I never thought life could feel this steady," he said. She nodded gently. "Because it's built on truth now." Outside, the world moved quietly forward. Inside, their story rested in a place beyond doubt, shaped not by one perfect moment, but by countless small choices that had turned regret into something lasting. And as Eric turned away from the window, joining Camila in the soft glow of the room, he understood that the greatest change in his life hadn't come from dramatic gestures. It had come from the simple, powerful decision to stay, again and again, until love felt like home. Evening settled gently over the apartment, the kind of quiet that felt warm rather than empty. Brielle sat curled on the couch finishing a drawing, while Riley carefully adjusted a small model kite on the table, testing its balance with serious concentration. Eric walked in carrying a stack of books from the bookstore, placing them down with a soft thud. "Special delivery," he announced. Brielle's eyes lit up. "New stories?" "Only the best ones," he said, handing her the top book. Camila watched the exchange from the doorway, her smile calm and steady. Moments like this no longer surprised her. They had become part of the everyday rhythm, simple gestures that quietly strengthened the bond between them. Dinner passed with laughter and small debates about which book should be read first. Riley insisted on something adventurous, while Brielle argued for a softer story filled with magic. Eric finally raised his hands in surrender. "We'll alternate chapters. Everyone wins." Afterward, they gathered on the floor, the room glowing with soft light as Eric read aloud. Brielle leaned against him, listening closely, and Riley followed along with a finger tracing each line. Camila sat nearby, letting the sound of his voice fill the space. She realized that the calm she once longed for had arrived without fanfare, built from consistency, patience, and quiet trust. When the twins drifted off to sleep, Eric closed the book gently and stood beside the window. Street lights flickered below, and the night air felt cool against the glass. "You've changed this place," Camila said softly. "I didn't do it alone," he replied. She stepped closer, her hand brushing his. "No, but you chose to stay when it mattered most." He nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. 5 years earlier, fear had shaped his decisions. Now, every choice felt guided by something steadier. The next morning arrived bright and clear. Riley rushed to show Eric a new design idea, while Brielle practiced reading lines aloud, determined to improve her voice for the next school event. Camila watched them all, her heart settling into a quiet rhythm that felt like home. Later, at the park, the kite lifted easily into the sky. Brielle ran beneath it, laughing, while Riley held the string with careful focus. Eric stood behind them, offering guidance only when needed, letting their confidence grow naturally. Camila joined him on the grass. "You've become part of their world in a way that feels effortless." "It doesn't feel like effort anymore," he said. "It feels like where I'm meant to be." As the sun dipped low, they walked home together, the sky glowing with soft color. Inside the apartment, Brielle hung another drawing on the wall while Riley placed the kite near the others. each one a small reminder of moments they had shared. Eric stood back, taking it all in. The laughter, the warmth, the life they had rebuilt piece by piece. "I used to think stories needed big endings," he said quietly. He reached for her hand, holding it with quiet certainty. Outside, the world moved on as it always did, but inside their home, the truth had already revealed itself, not in one dramatic moment, but in the steady rhythm of love that grew stronger every day they chose to remain together. The apartment felt especially calm that evening, the soft glow of the lamp touching the walls covered in drawings and small memories. Brielle lay on her stomach sketching a new design, while Riley adjusted the strings of a half-finished kite, determined to make it stronger than the last one. Eric leaned back on the couch, watching them with a quiet smile. "You two never really slow down, do you?" "We're improving," Riley replied seriously. Brielle nodded. "Every story gets better when you keep working on it." Camilla paused in the doorway, listening to their conversation. The words felt deeper than the twins probably realized, a reflection of the journey all of them had taken. Dinner was simple that night, filled with laughter and easy conversation. Brielle insisted on telling a long story about her reading class, and Riley described a new idea for a science project that involved kites and wind patterns. Eric listened carefully, offering encouragement without taking over, letting them lead their own excitement. Afterward, they gathered in the living room for another chapter of their favorite book. Eric's voice carried gently through the room, and Brielle leaned against him, while Riley followed every word with focused attention. Camilla watched quietly, realizing how natural everything had become. There was no need to question whether this peace would last. It had grown slowly, day by day, until it felt steady. When the twins drifted into sleep, Eric closed the book and set it aside. The apartment settled into silence, broken only by the faint hum of the city outside. "You've changed more than you realize," Camilla said softly. He glanced at her. "I think I just stopped running from what mattered." She smiled gently. "That's enough." They stood by the window for a moment, watching the night deepen. The past no longer felt like a weight between them, it felt like a lesson that had shaped where they stood now. The next morning brought a bright sky and a gentle breeze, perfect kite weather according to Riley, who had already gathered supplies before breakfast. Brielle added bright ribbons while Eric helped adjust the frame, and Camilla packed snacks for the park. At the field, the kite lifted smoothly into the air, steady against the wind. Brielle laughed as it climbed higher, and Riley guided the string with careful precision. Eric stood beside Camilla, feeling the quiet satisfaction of being exactly where he belonged. "I used to think happiness was something far away," he admitted. "And now?" she asked. "Now it feels like this," he said, gesturing toward the twins, the open sky, and the simple moment they shared. She slipped her hand into his, her voice soft. "Sometimes the strongest stories grow slowly." As evening approached, they walked home together, the sky fading into soft shades of gold. Inside the apartment, Brielle hung another drawing beside the others while Riley carefully placed the kite near the door. Eric looked around the room, taking in the warmth they had built, not perfect, not flawless, but real. And as he turned off the lights that night, one thought stayed with him. 5 years ago, fear had convinced him to walk away from the truth standing right in front of him. Now, patience and love had guided him back, and this time he didn't leave. He stayed, not because everything was easy, but because staying had become the most honest choice he could make. The next few days moved with a quiet, steady rhythm that no longer felt fragile. Morning sunlight filled the apartment, catching the bright ribbons Brielle had tied to the newest kite, while Riley carefully checked every knot like a small engineer determined to get things right. Eric stepped into the room carrying a bag of groceries. "I see the workshop started without me," he said. "We had inspiration," Brielle replied proudly. Riley glanced up. "And a strong breeze today, perfect testing weather." Camilla laughed softly from the kitchen. "Then we better finish breakfast quickly before the wind changes its mind." At the park, the sky stretched wide and clear. Riley released the kite slowly, letting it catch the current while Brielle ran beneath it, her laughter rising with every gust. Eric stood behind them, guiding only when needed, his hands steady but gentle. "It's flying higher than before," Brielle said, shielding her eyes from the sun. "That's because you both kept improving it," he answered. Camilla watched from the grass, her expression peaceful. 5 years ago, she had learned how to stand strong on her own. Now she watched something different, not dependence but partnership, built carefully over time. They sat together on the blanket, sharing snacks and small stories about school and work. Nothing extraordinary happened, yet the simplicity felt meaningful. As the afternoon light softened, Riley handed the string to Eric. "Your turn," he said. Eric hesitated, then took it, feeling the pull of the wind through the line. For a moment he simply stood there, looking up at the kite drifting steadily against the sky. "I used to think control meant holding everything tightly," he said quietly. "Now I think it means trusting the wind sometimes." Camila smiled. "That sounds like growth." Walking home later, Brielle skipped ahead humming while Riley explained plans for an even bigger design. The apartment welcomed them with familiar warmth. Drawings, books, and small signs of a life lived fully. That evening, as always, they gathered for a story. Eric read with exaggerated voices that made Brielle giggle while Riley pretended not to laugh. Camila watched from the couch, letting the calm fill the room. When the twins drifted into sleep, Eric closed the book gently. "They're happy," he said softly. "They always were," Camila replied. "But now you're part of that happiness too." He stood by the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The weight he once carried had faded into something lighter, not forgotten but transformed. "I used to be afraid of what love asked from me," he admitted. "Now I see it's not about losing yourself. It's about becoming more honest." She stepped closer, resting her hand in his. "And you've done that." Outside, the night settled slowly, wrapping the world in calm. Inside, their story continued, not through grand declarations, but through ordinary moments that held deeper meaning than any dramatic ending could. 5 years earlier, fear had guided Eric away from the truth. Now, patience had led him back to a life shaped by laughter, forgiveness, and quiet courage. And as he turned off the last light and walked down the hallway beside Camila, one simple thought stayed with him. The truth hadn't arrived all at once. It had grown, in every small promise kept, in every story read, in every day he chose to stay. Morning came softly, bringing with it the quiet hum of a new day. Brielle sat near the window, tying bright ribbons onto a small kite while Riley adjusted the frame of a larger one, measuring every detail with careful focus. Eric leaned against the counter with a warm drink in his hands, watching them. "You two treat kites like they're living things," he joked. "They are," Brielle said seriously. "They carry stories." Riley nodded. "And they only fly if you build them right." Camila stepped beside Eric, her shoulder brushing his lightly. "I think that applies to more than kites," she said with a soft smile. After breakfast, they walked to the park together. The air felt calm, the sky clear enough to make every color brighter. Riley released the kite slowly while Brielle ran beneath it, laughter echoing across the grass. Eric watched quietly, the scene settling deep inside him. There was no rush to move forward, no fear of what might come next, just the steady comfort of being present. "You've found your place," Camila said gently. "I didn't expect it to feel this simple," he admitted. "I thought rebuilding trust would be louder, harder." "It was hard at first," she replied, "but you stayed long enough for it to become natural." They sat together on the blanket, sharing snacks while the twins talked about school and future plans. Riley described a new design he wanted to try, and Brielle promised to paint it with bright stars. As the sun began to dip lower, they packed up and headed home, the quiet rhythm of their steps matching the calm around them. Inside the apartment, Brielle hung another drawing on the wall, while Riley lined up the kites neatly by the door. Eric stood back, taking it all in, the laughter, the warmth, the life they had built piece by piece. That evening he read another chapter from their favorite book. Brielle leaned against him, eyes heavy with sleep, and Riley listened with quiet focus. Camila watched from across the room, her expression peaceful. When the twins drifted off, Eric closed the book gently and joined her by the window. "I used to think second chances were rare," he said softly. "Now I think they happen whenever someone chooses to grow." She nodded, her hand resting in his. "And you chose it." Outside, the stars appeared slowly, one by one. Inside, their story moved forward without needing a grand ending, shaped instead by ordinary days filled with patience, forgiveness, and the simple courage to stay. And as Eric turned off the light, a quiet certainty stayed with him. The truth that once felt distant had become part of his everyday life, not loud or dramatic, but steady and real, growing stronger each time he chose to remain where love had finally found its way back. Evening arrived gently, the sky outside fading into soft shades of blue and gold. Inside the apartment, Brielle carefully arranged her newest drawing on the wall, while Riley checked the strings of their latest kite one more time, as if the wind might call for it at any moment. Eric watched them from the couch, a quiet sense of calm settling over him. "You two never run out of energy," he said with a small laugh. "We're preparing," Riley replied seriously. "For what?" Eric asked. "For tomorrow," Brielle said, turning toward him. "Every day feels like a new chapter." Camila paused in the doorway, listening to the conversation. She had learned to recognize moments like this, simple words that carried deeper meaning than they first appeared to hold. Dinner passed with easy conversation and soft laughter. Riley talked about a school project, while Brielle described a story she wanted to write about kites that always found their way home. Eric listened closely, offering encouragement without taking over, letting them shape their own ideas. Afterward, they gathered for their usual story time. Eric opened the book and began reading, his voice warm and steady. Brielle leaned against him and Riley followed along carefully, occasionally whispering corrections that made them all smile. Camila watched from across the room, feeling a quiet gratitude for how naturally everything had settled into place. The fear and uncertainty of years ago felt distant now, not erased but softened by time and growth. When the twins fell asleep, Eric closed the book and joined Camila by the window. The street below was calm, lights glowing softly against the evening air. "Do you ever miss the way things used to be?" he asked quietly. She thought for a moment before answering. "I don't miss the pain, but I'm grateful for the lessons. They led us here." He nodded slowly. "I used to believe the truth would arrive all at once. Instead, it came slowly, through moments like this." She smiled gently, her hand slipping into his. "That's how real change happens." The next morning, they returned to the park, the twins racing ahead with the new kite. The wind lifted it easily, carrying it higher into the clear sky. Brielle laughed, Riley guided the string, and Eric stood beside Camila, watching the scene with quiet contentment. "I used to think I had to control everything," he admitted. "Now I know sometimes you just let the wind carry what you've built." She leaned her head lightly against his shoulder, "And trust that it will stay steady." As the afternoon faded, they walked home together, the apartment welcoming them with warmth and familiarity. Brielle hung another drawing, Riley placed the kite carefully by the door, and Eric looked around at the life they had created, not perfect, but deeply real. And in that moment, he understood something simple and lasting. The truth that once felt hidden had grown quietly over time, in laughter, in forgiveness, and in every small decision to stay. Because sometimes the strongest stories don't end with dramatic words. They continue, gently and steadily, in the quiet space where love feels like home. The apartment rested in a soft glow as evening settled in, the quiet hum of the day fading into calm. Brielle sat at the table coloring a new design while Riley carefully rewound kite string, his movements slow and precise. Eric leaned against the doorway watching them, a small smile settling naturally on his face. "You know," he said, "there was a time I thought peaceful days would feel boring." Brielle looked up. "They're not boring. They're safe." Riley nodded in agreement. "And we still do fun things." Camila stepped beside Eric, her shoulder brushing his lightly. "Peace doesn't mean nothing happens," she said. "It just means you're not fighting the moment anymore." Dinner moved easily, laughter over small stories, shared glances that no longer carried uncertainty. Afterward, Eric picked up their favorite book and settled onto the couch. Brielle leaned against him instantly, and Riley sat close enough to follow every word. His voice filled the room, steady and warm. Camila watched from across the space, realizing how naturally their lives had blended together. There were no grand gestures anymore, only the quiet strength of everyday connection. When the twins fell asleep, Eric closed the book and set it aside. The apartment grew still, the kind of silence that felt complete rather than empty. "You found a different kind of happiness," Camila said softly. "I didn't know it could feel this simple," he admitted. "I thought love had to be loud to be real." She smiled gently. "Sometimes the strongest love is quiet." They stood by the window for a moment, watching the streetlights glow below. The past no longer felt like a shadow hanging over them. It felt like a chapter that had shaped who they had become. The next morning brought clear skies and a steady breeze, perfect kite weather according to Riley, who was already waiting by the door with their newest design. At the park, the kite lifted easily into the air, bright against the blue sky. Brielle ran beneath it laughing while Eric guided Riley's hands on the string. "You're getting better at this," Eric said. Riley grinned. "Because we keep practicing." Camila sat on the grass watching them, her expression calm. She remembered the uncertainty that once filled her days, and she felt grateful for the steady life they had built instead. As evening approached, they walked home together, the twins talking about future plans while Eric and Camila shared quiet glances that needed no words. Inside, Brielle hung another drawing on the wall. Riley placed the kite carefully beside the others, and Eric stood back, taking in the room, every corner filled with memories that had grown slowly over time. "I used to think stories needed dramatic endings," he said softly. Camila reached for his hand. "Sometimes the best ending is simply knowing you stayed." He nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle deep within him. Because 5 years earlier, fear had almost closed the door on everything that mattered. Now patience and honesty had opened a new path, one shaped by laughter, forgiveness, and the simple courage to remain. And as the night wrapped gently around their home, their story continued, not as a perfect ending, but as a steady life built on love that had finally found its way back. The next few days carried a quiet sense of anticipation, though no one spoke about it directly. The town spring festival was returning again, the same one where so much had once changed, and Brielle had already decided it would be their official kite day. "You promised we'd fly the big one there," she reminded Eric while tying ribbons along the edges. "I remember," he said with a smile. "And this time we're ready." Riley checked the frame carefully, his movements calm and focused. "It's stronger now," he said. "We fixed the parts that didn't work before." Camila watched them from the doorway, realizing how much those words reflected more than just the kite. When festival day arrived, the park filled with music and color just like it had years ago. Stalls lined the pathways, laughter drifted through the air, and children ran past carrying bright balloons. Eric paused for a moment at the entrance, the memories of that first reunion brushing lightly against him. Camila noticed his hesitation. "You okay?" He nodded slowly. "Yeah, it just feels different standing here now." They walked forward together, Brielle and Riley pulling them toward the open field where kites already dotted the sky. Riley released their newest design carefully, letting the wind catch it little by little until it rose high above the crowd. "It's perfect," Brielle shouted, spinning beneath it. Eric held the string for a moment before passing it back to Riley. This time there was no heaviness in his chest, only gratitude for the life that had grown from a single second chance. Nearby, music played softly while families gathered on blankets. Camila sat beside Eric on the grass, watching the twins laugh together. "I do," he said. "I thought I had lost everything. And now?" He looked toward Brielle and Riley, the kite drifting steadily above them. "Now I know I just needed time to learn how to stay." She slipped her hand into his, her smile calm. Later, Brielle insisted on taking another photo. The four of them stood close together, sunlight catching their faces as the camera clicked. Riley held the kite string proudly while Eric and Camila shared a quiet glance that said more than words ever could. As evening settled, the festival lights began to glow. Families started packing up, laughter fading into softer conversations. Eric stood for a moment, watching the sky where their kite still moved gently with the wind. "You know," he said softly, 5 years ago fear made me believe I had to walk away from the truth. Today I understand something else. The truth doesn't disappear just because we're not ready for it." Camila nodded. "Sometimes it waits until we learn how to listen." They walked home slowly, the twins talking about future designs and new stories they wanted to write. Inside the apartment, Brielle hung the festival photo beside the others while Riley placed the kite carefully near the door. Eric stood back, taking in the room, every drawing, every memory, every quiet moment that had shaped the life they shared. "I used to think love meant never making mistakes," he said quietly. Camila looked at him gently. "Love means learning from them." That night, as he read one last story and the twins drifted into sleep, Eric felt a calm certainty settle within him. The truth had never needed grand speeches or dramatic proof. It had grown slowly, in laughter, in forgiveness, in every small decision to come back and stay. And this time, standing in the quiet glow of their home, Eric Spencer didn't look toward the door. He looked toward the future, knowing he was already exactly where he belonged. The days after the festival moved gently, carrying a quiet sense of completion that no one needed to put into words. The photo from the park now hung beside the others, Brielle's favorite reminder that every chapter deserves a picture. One evening, the twins spread their books across the living room floor, while Eric helped Riley adjust a small model glider. Camila watched from the kitchen, listening to the soft rise and fall of their voices. "You've gotten really good at this," Riley said, handing Eric a piece of tape. "I had good teachers," Eric replied, glancing toward him with a smile. Brielle looked up from her drawing. "You're part of the team now. That's why." Her words landed softly, simple and honest. Later, as the sun dipped low, they walked to the park again. Not for a festival, not for a special event, just because the evening felt too calm to stay inside. The field stretched open before them, the wind gentle enough to lift a kite without effort. Riley released the line while Brielle ran beside him, her laughter echoing through the quiet space. Eric and Camila sat on a nearby bench, watching. "Do you feel it?" she asked quietly. "What?" "The difference," she said. "How nothing feels fragile anymore." He nodded slowly. "It feels settled." She smiled, resting her hand over his. "That's because you stopped trying to fix the past and started building the present." As the sky turned soft shades of gold, the twins returned, breathless and happy. "Can we stay a little longer?" Brielle asked. "Just a few more minutes," Camila replied. They sat together on the grass, sharing stories about school and plans for the next season. Riley talked about entering a bigger kite competition one day, and Brielle promised to design something even brighter. Eric listened quietly, realizing how natural these conversations had become, how the fear that once guided him had faded into something steadier. Back at the apartment, Brielle added another drawing to the wall while Riley carefully placed the kite near the others. Eric stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room filled with memories they had built together. "You're smiling again," Camilla said softly. "I was just thinking," he replied, "how the truth didn't arrive in one big moment. It came in pieces, every time I chose to stay." She nodded gently. "That's how real stories grow." That night, after another story was read and the twins drifted into sleep, Eric turned off the light and stood quietly by the window. The street outside was calm, the air cool and still. 5 years earlier, he believed walking away had protected him. Now he understood something deeper, that patience, honesty, and quiet courage had brought him back to a life richer than anything he had imagined. He turned toward Camilla, her presence steady beside him, and felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. Their story wasn't ending with a dramatic moment. It was continuing, gently, steadily, in every ordinary day they chose to share, proving that sometimes the strongest endings are simply new beginnings lived with open hearts. The apartment felt especially calm that evening, the soft glow of the lamp reflecting off the wall of drawings Brielle had carefully arranged over time. Riley sat cross-legged on the floor testing the balance of a small model kite while Eric leaned back on the couch, watching with quiet pride. "You've improved the design again," Eric said. Riley nodded. "Every time we try, we learn something new." Brielle looked up from her sketchbook. "That's how stories work too. They get better when you don't give up on them." Camilla paused near the doorway, listening. The twins spoke so easily about growth now, as if they had always understood that patience mattered more than perfection. Dinner passed with laughter and soft conversation. Afterward, Eric picked up their favorite book and settled between the twins, reading in a warm, steady voice. Brielle leaned against him almost instantly, and Riley followed every word with careful attention. Camilla watched from across the room, feeling the quiet certainty that had taken years to build. The past no longer hovered over them. It had simply become part of the story that led them here. When the twins drifted off to sleep, Eric closed the book gently. "They're happy," he said quietly. "They always were," Camilla replied. "But now you're part of that happiness." He joined her by the window, where the night air brushed lightly against the glass. "I used to think second chances were about fixing mistakes," he said. "Now I see they're about learning how to live differently." She smiled softly, her hand resting in his. "And you did—" The next morning arrived bright and calm. Riley rushed to the door with a kite already in hand, while Brielle grabbed a bundle of ribbons she insisted would make it fly like a story in the sky. At the park, the kite lifted easily, catching the breeze as if it had been waiting for this moment. Brielle ran beneath it laughing, and Riley guided the string with quiet focus. Eric stood beside Camilla, watching the scene unfold. "It feels complete," he admitted softly. She nodded. "Not because everything is perfect, but because it's real." They sat together on the grass while the twins played, the sky stretching wide above them. No rush, no lingering fear, just the calm rhythm of a life shaped by trust and patience. As evening settled, they walked home slowly, the apartment welcoming them with warmth and familiarity. Brielle hung another drawing on the wall, while Riley lined up the kites near the door. Eric stood back, taking in the room filled with memories. "I used to think stories needed a big ending," he said quietly. Camilla reached for his hand. "Sometimes the best ending is simply knowing you stayed." He nodded, feeling the truth settle deeply within him. Because 5 years earlier, fear had nearly closed the door on everything that mattered. Now patience and love had opened a new path, one built from laughter, forgiveness, and the quiet courage to remain. And as the lights dimmed and another ordinary day came to an end, their story continued, not with dramatic words, but with the steady promise of tomorrow, lived side by side. The evening air felt calm as the apartment settled into its familiar rhythm. Brielle sat at the table outlining another bright design, her pencil moving quickly across the page while Riley adjusted the frame of a kite resting carefully near the window. Eric watched them from the couch, a quiet sense of gratitude settling in his chest. "You know," he said, "every time I think you've reached your best design, you come up with something even better." Riley shrugged modestly. "We just keep improving." Brielle grinned. "That's because we don't stop trying." Camilla paused beside Eric, her shoulder brushing his lightly. "Sounds like a good life rule," she said softly. Dinner passed easily, filled with small jokes and plans for the weekend. Later, they gathered for their nightly story. Eric opened the book, his voice steady and warm as Brielle leaned against him and Riley followed along, occasionally whispering the next line before he read it. Camilla watched from the corner of the room, letting the calm settle around her. The fear and uncertainty of years before had softened into something steady, not forgotten, but transformed. When the twins fell asleep, Eric closed the book gently and set it aside. "You've found your place here," Camilla said quietly. "I didn't realize how much I needed it," he replied. They stood by the window for a moment, watching the glow of streetlights below. "I used to believe love meant never making mistakes," he admitted. "Now I think it means learning how to grow from them." She nodded, her hand slipping into his. "And you've grown a lot." The next morning brought a gentle breeze, perfect for kite flying, according to Riley, who was already waiting by the door before anyone else finished breakfast. Brielle added bright ribbons to the tail while Eric helped adjust the frame, and Camilla packed snacks with a quiet smile. At the park, the kite lifted into the sky easily, bright against the soft blue above them. Brielle ran beneath it laughing, and Riley held the string with steady focus. Eric stood beside Camilla, watching the twins with calm contentment. "It feels different now," he said softly. "What does?" she asked. "Everything," he answered. "Not because the past disappeared, but because we learned how to move forward together." She leaned gently against him, her smile warm. As evening approached, they walked home slowly, the twins talking about new ideas and future plans. Inside the apartment, Brielle hung another drawing while Riley placed the kite carefully beside the others. Eric looked around the room, feeling the quiet certainty of belonging. 5 years ago, fear had convinced him to walk away from the truth standing in front of him. Now, patience and honesty had led him back, not to a perfect ending, but to a life filled with real moments, shared laughter, and the simple courage to stay. And as the lights dimmed and the apartment grew still, their story continued, gently and steadily, in every ordinary day they chose to share. The evening drifted in quietly, wrapping the apartment in a soft golden glow. Brielle sat near the window, adding the last bright star to her newest drawing, while Riley checked the knots on their biggest kite one more time, determined to make sure nothing slipped out of place. Eric leaned against the doorway watching them, the faintest smile resting on his face. Moments like this no longer surprised him. They felt steady now, earned through time, patience, and choices that had slowly reshaped everything. "Are we flying it tomorrow?" Brielle asked, holding up the drawing for approval. "If the wind agrees," Eric said gently. Riley nodded. "It will. I checked the forecast." Camilla watched from the kitchen, listening to the easy rhythm of their voices. There was no tension anymore, no quiet hesitation hanging in the air, just warmth. Later, they gathered on the couch for their nightly story. Eric opened the book, his voice calm and steady as Brielle leaned against him, and Riley followed every word with focused attention. Camilla sat nearby, letting the sound fill the room, a sound that once felt uncertain, now familiar and safe. When the story ended, Brielle yawned softly. "I like endings that feel happy," she murmured. Eric brushed a strand of hair from her face. "The best endings are really just new beginnings." After the twins drifted to sleep, he and Camilla stood by the window together. The streetlights glowed below, casting quiet reflections across the glass. "Do you remember the day at the festival?" she asked softly. "I remember thinking everything was over," he admitted. "And now I realize it was only the moment I finally started listening." She smiled, her hand resting in his. The next morning arrived clear and bright, perfect kite weather. The park filled slowly with families, laughter drifting across the field as colorful shapes lifted into the sky. Riley released their newest kite carefully, letting it rise little by little until it caught the wind fully. "It's flying!" Brielle shouted, spinning beneath it. Eric watched, his chest light in a way he hadn't felt in years. 5 years earlier, fear had convinced him that walking away was safer than trusting what he felt. Standing here now, he understood how wrong he had been, how the truth had waited patiently for him to grow into someone ready to accept it. Camilla sat beside him on the grass. "You look peaceful," she said. "I am," he answered. "Not because everything is perfect, but because I stopped running." She nodded, her smile soft. The kite drifted higher, steady against the blue sky. Riley guided the string with confidence, Brielle laughing beside him, and Eric realized something simple and lasting. Love hadn't returned through grand promises or dramatic apologies. It had come back quietly, through shared mornings, small conversations, stories read at bedtime, and the steady choice to stay when leaving would have been easier. As evening approached, they walked home together, the twins talking about future designs and new stories they wanted to write. Inside the apartment, Brielle hung her newest drawing beside the others, while Riley placed the kite carefully near the door like a symbol of everything they had built. Eric paused, looking around the room filled with laughter, memories, and second chances. "I used to think the truth would arrive all at once," he said softly. "But it didn't. It grew, slowly. In every moment I chose to come back." Camilla reached for his hand. "And you did." That night, as the lights dimmed and the apartment settled into quiet, Eric closed the last book and stood for a moment beside the window. The world outside moved on, but inside he felt something steady. Not the excitement of a new beginning, but the calm certainty of a life rebuilt. 5 years ago, fear spoke louder than love, but patience, honesty, and quiet courage revealed what had always been true. Sometimes the truth doesn't arrive in a single moment. Sometimes it grows slowly, in laughter, in forgiveness, and in the choice to stay. And this time, Eric Spencer didn't walk away. He stayed. If this story stayed with you, if you believe in growth, second chances, and the quiet power of choosing love, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the most meaningful stories aren't about perfect beginnings, they're about finding your way back and deciding at last to remain. Morning light drifted softly into the apartment, touching the edges of the drawings on the wall and the kites lined carefully near the door. Brielle sat cross-legged on the floor, adding tiny stars to her latest design, while Riley checked the balance of a small model he had built the night before. Eric stepped into the room with 2 mugs in his hands. "You both start working before the day even begins," he said with a quiet laugh. "We don't want to miss good ideas," Riley replied. Brielle held up her drawing. "This one is called Home Wind. It always comes back." Camilla paused beside Eric, her smile soft at the words. The twins spoke so easily about returning, about staying, things that once felt heavy but now felt natural. They walked together to the park later that morning, the air clear and calm. Riley released a kite into the breeze while Brielle ran beneath it, her laughter rising with the wind. Eric watched quietly, the memory of another day in this same place lingering at the edge of his thoughts. The day everything began to change. "You're thinking again," Camilla said gently. "I was remembering who I used to be," he admitted, "and how different everything feels now." She nodded. "Growth doesn't erase the past. It gives it meaning." They sat together on the grass, sharing snacks while the twins talked about future plans, bigger kites, new stories, adventures waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Eric listened, realizing how simple happiness had become. No grand gestures, no loud declarations, just presence. As the sun dipped lower, they walked home slowly, their shadows stretching across the pavement. Inside the apartment, Brielle hung another drawing, while Riley carefully stored the kite near the others. Eric stood back, taking in the room filled with warmth and quiet memories. "You look like you're finishing a chapter," Camilla said. "Maybe," he replied softly. "Or maybe I'm finally understanding it." When the twins drifted into sleep, Eric closed the book gently and walked to the window. The night outside felt calm, the air cool and steady. 5 years earlier he had believed fear protected him. Now he knew something deeper, that love didn't demand perfection, only honesty and the courage to remain when things felt uncertain. He turned back toward Camilla, her presence steady beside him, and felt a quiet certainty settle within his chest. Their story didn't need another dramatic moment. It had already reached its truth, not in a single event, but in every ordinary day they chose to share. And as the lights dimmed and the apartment rested in stillness, Eric Spencer understood something he once doubted. The strongest endings aren't loud. They arrive gently, in laughter, in forgiveness, and in the simple promise to stay, today, tomorrow, and every day that follows.